Councilmember Bouders?
Here.
Councilmember Donahue?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Present.
And Mayor Medina.
Here. Can I get an approval of the final agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I get a motion by Member Bouders and second by Member Donahue. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Any ex parte communications to report?
I received some email about it from residents.
I received input from the Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee on this topic.
I received one email, I believe.
Yeah. Same.
Okay. All right. Any public comment for items not on this agenda? No? Okay. Let's get cracking. 6.1.
Okay, Mayor Medina, members of the City Council, I'm here to present to you a study session on the possible elimination of the minimum parking requirements. Here is an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I want to apologize in advance that this whole presentation is a little bit text heavy. I will try to make it as interesting as possible, as interesting as you can make a subject like parking. So a little bit of background, then of course we always start with the general plan to make sure that what we're doing is consistent with the general plan. I'll talk about the regulations that will be specifically affected by the elimination of the parking minimum. And then that would imply some additional code changes around the concept of mandatory language, since parking would no longer be mandatory. There are implications for bicycle parking, for parking substitutions and credits, for effects on existing parking, and then staff has some recommendations for some other modifications to the regulations related to parking. The Planning Commission held a study session on July 25th, and they had a number of, I thought, insightful and thought-provoking comments, and I'll go over those, and then we have some discussion questions for you. So by way of background, parking regulations are contained in Article 4 of Chapter 4 of the Planning Regulations, and they took effect in 2013. The off-street parking requirement, as you know, is expressed as a range from the minimum to the maximum around an estimated demand. The minimum is 33% less than the estimated demand, and the maximum is 10% more. A conditional use permit is required if you want to either exceed the maximum or provide less than the minimum. On March 5th of this year, the council directed that an ordinance be prepared to eliminate the minimum parking requirement. And as we were preparing that ordinance, we identified a number of issues in the planning regulations that also needed to be addressed. So rather than just diving into the ordinance and presenting it to the Planning Commission and Council, we thought it would be prudent to hold study sessions with both of those bodies first. And I'm glad that we did, because the Planning Commission, as you will see, brought up several issues that we hadn't really thought much about. This is the way if you think of the parking as a continuum from 0 to infinity, the amount of parking that could be provided for any particular use, we start with the estimated demand. Now, a very typical estimated demand is 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. That's many uses have that estimated demand. And then this would be the range of allowed parking that you could go below or above that. 33% below would be the minimum, and 10% above would be the maximum. If you want to go outside that range, either above or below, you would need a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission for that, or from the council if the project required council approval for another reason. The proposal of eliminating the minimum would have the effect of basically making the minimum be 0. So it wouldn't affect the maximum. So that really what it does is it expands the range that people could provide parking, anywhere from 0 up to 10% above the maximum. And obviously above the maximum would still, above the demand. Above the maximum would still require a conditional use permit. But there would be no use permit for minimum, because the minimum is now 0. This is one of the 10 guiding principles of the general plan. I'm not going to read you all of these words here, but you know the general plan is based on these 10 guiding principles. This is the one that speaks to transportation issues. It doesn't specifically mention parking, but it does set the tone for the general plan as being something that's oriented towards trying to basically provide alternatives to the automobile so that people can get places without using a car. And then there are a number of goals and policies in the transportation element, specifically that talk about parking. There are a lot of other goals and policies that also relate to parking, but these are the 4 that are most explicitly about parking. And if you read them, you'll see that none of them says, and nowhere in the general plan does it say, that some minimum amount of parking must be provided. Off-street parking has to be provided. In fact, instead, I would say, again, like the guiding principle, the tone of these is to provide alternatives to the car, and so that people don't have to necessarily use cars. So my conclusion from this, looking at the provisions of the general plan, is that eliminating the minimum parking requirement does not conflict at all with the general plan, and it would not require general plan amendment or any change to the general plan. It's totally consistent with the general plan. Concerning the regulation effects that are specifically, the regulation sections that are specifically affected by eliminating the parking minimum, Section 94404G stipulates the minimum and maximum number of parking spaces, and that's where it says it's 33% below is the minimum and 10% above is the maximum. And Section 94404H sets forth the required findings for providing less than the minimum or more than the maximum. So if the minimum is changed to 0, then the findings to provide parking below the minimum, of course, would be deleted, and that would mean that these sections would be consolidated and renumbered. There's also similar provisions in the code sections about the transit hub overlay zone, in which all parking requirements are cut by 50%, so that would also be amended to delete any references to minimum parking. And there's also similarly for accessory dwelling units, what we would do there would just be completely eliminate any parking requirements for accessory dwelling units. And I think the state law already, the recent changes, they change the state law around ADUs pretty much every year, but I think now it says we can't require parking for them anyway, so we'd just be consistent with state law then. We also propose that if a project provides less than the estimated parking demand, that we add a provision to the code where the decision makers, if it's the staff or the planning commission or the city council, has the option of adding a condition of approval to require basically TDM measures, measures to try to promote alternative modes of transportation. This is not something that would be required, but we would just want to make it clear that the decision makers would have the option of putting on a condition that would further encourage people to use other modes of travel besides cars. Concerning mandatory language, if you think about it, eliminating the minimum parking requirement basically makes parking optional. You don't have to provide off-street parking anymore. So therefore, it's not mandatory. That means that if you have language in the code about parking requirements or required parking, that's really not accurate anymore, because we won't have parking requirements and we won't have required parking. So any place where that kind of language exists would need to be modified. An example of this is in the purpose section of the parking part of the code. We would reword that to say the purpose of off-street parking and loading regulations are to offer flexible means of minimizing the amount of land devoted to parking of automobiles by allowing reductions in the number of, and then we would strike the word required and just say parking spaces, etc. It may seem like a subtlety, but we think it's important to make it clear that parking is no longer required. There are about 30 instances of that kind of mandatory language in the code that we would need to modify. Concerning bicycle parking, bike parking currently is tied to auto parking actually provided. So it's a percentage of however many car parking spaces you provide in your project, you have to provide a percentage of that as bike parking. The issue there is if someone provides, a very minimal amount of auto parking, they're down at the bare minimum, or they get a use permit from the planning commission to go below the minimum, that also then reduces the amount of bike parking that's provided since it's tied to the car parking. We propose to uncouple those so that we would still have an explicit bicycle parking requirement. So for non-residential uses, we would propose that both the long-term, that's the interior parking, and the short-term in bike racks be 1 space for every 10 spaces of estimated auto parking demand. So regardless of whether they provide any auto spaces or not, the bike parking would be based on 10% of what our table says is the estimated auto demand. And for residential uses, it would remain at 1 space per unit, which it currently is, and the short term then would become 1 space for every 20 units instead of 1 for every 4 auto visitor spaces, because for whatever reason they might not have that, very many auto visitor spaces, and then the bike parking is tied to that. So instead, we would just say it's 1 for every 20 units, which if they did the 1 for every 4 auto visitor spaces, it works out to the same number, but this ties it to the number of units, not to the number of car parking spaces. We also propose that the bicycle parking standards can be modified as appropriate by the decision makers. There are some pretty explicit standards in our code about bicycle parking, and sometimes for whatever reason these just aren't practical. So we would propose that the decision maker be able to modify those as deemed appropriate. And we also propose a change because in our experience we've found that sometimes for these small uses, especially if they're like 3,000 square feet or less, there's just no room in the facility for them to provide secure interior bicycle parking. So if that's the case, we would propose substituting short-term parking spaces on a 1-for-1 basis for the long-term spaces if there is just not physically room in these very small projects to provide the indoor bicycle parking. Concerning substitutions and credits, we currently have in the code a provision that allows a parking credit for a significant structure, for the reuse of a significant structure, if the previous use of that structure had a parking deficiency under the code. So you would get to subtract whatever the parking deficiency was of your new use from your new parking requirement. And there's also a credit of 1 auto space for every 4 motorcycle spaces in the current code. The first thing for the significant structures, we would propose eliminating that parking credit altogether, since there would no longer be a minimum parking requirement. For motorcycle spaces, we wouldn't eliminate that. We would just say that when you count your car spaces, you can count every 4 motorcycle spaces as a car space, but it still isn't mandatory. We have a parking in lieu fee. If for whatever reason the developer can't provide parking, they can pay the city money that can then be used to build a public parking structure. And we would just remove that entirely. And we'd also have to remove it from the master fee schedule where it's listed how much that fee is. I don't see this as a significant change because in my almost 19 years, actually more than 19 years now, with the city, we've never used a parking in lieu fee. Nobody's ever paid it. So I don't think eliminating it is going to be noticed by anybody. Concerning existing parking, in the current code, in general, you're required to keep any existing parking you've already got and not reduce it below the amount that the code requires. Obviously, if the code doesn't require any parking anymore, then you wouldn't have to do this. So we would amend this section of the code to say that existing parking may be reduced or even eliminated. Non-conforming uses currently can be expanded or altered if the parking is not reduced below what is required. Again, if the code doesn't require any parking, then this would be modified to say that the parking could be reduced or eliminated. However, we would propose that if an existing parking facility is to be retained and reconfigured as part of a project, if they're actually going to touch the parking lot and make some changes to it, we would want for it to meet the current parking standards, meaning the size of the parking spaces and the size of the maneuvering aisles and things like that, to make sure it works. So if they're going to touch it and reconfigure it, we want it to be built to the current standards, design standards. Now we have a number of projects, well, pretty much every project currently, that has conditions of approval. It requires some amount of parking in that old entitlement. The old entitlement will say how many parking spaces your project has to have. And we're pretty much locked into that, regardless of when the project was approved. If its entitlement says you got to have this many parking spaces, you got to have that many parking spaces, no matter what the current code says. We would propose that be allowed to be reduced or eliminated with a minor conditional use permit. So if a owner of a property says, I've got 50 parking spaces and my conditions of approval require me to have 50 parking spaces, but I really only need 25, can you please let me just get rid of 25 of them? Today we would say, we can't do that because your conditions say you have to have 50, but this would allow us to reduce it with a minor use permit. Other modifications that staff is proposing, in the findings for parking spaces in front of buildings and also for alternative parking plans, currently the language says that you're not allowed to exceed the number of spaces that are required by the code, or that the spaces have to be required by the code. Well, there wouldn't be any spaces required by the code anymore. So we would modify that language a little bit to say that we can consider this as long as it doesn't exceed the maximum number of spaces that are allowed, or unless a conditional use permit has been granted to exceed that maximum number. Under uses that are always accessory, we'd stipulate that any excess off-street parking that's not needed may be operated as the principal use of parking. That may be a little bit subtle, but the way the code works is a certain amount of parking is currently required, and if you have more than is required, you can carve off that additional parking and use it basically as a commercial parking lot. Hilton Garden Inn has done that. They got a conditional use permit to allow them to charge for their excess parking basically as a commercial parking lot. So you'd still be able to do that, but instead of having it be tied to whatever the code says you're supposed to have, since the code now says you don't really have to have any, we just say however much parking is deemed to not be needed by that use can be carved off as the principal use of parking and operated as a separate commercial activity. The section, the conditional use permit, obviously, for parking less than the minimum would be deleted from where it talks about use permits and what's minor and what's major and so forth. The provision about parking less than minimum would be deleted from there. We propose adding a provision to just make it explicit that off-street parking only applies to principal uses. So the way it works in the code, when you classify a use, you classify it as the main thing that use is, and any other uses on the site are considered to be accessory. So if you have a big warehouse and the primary use of the site is warehouse and it's got a little office in it, the office would be considered accessory to the warehouse use. So what this just clarifies is what is already our practice, is that the parking only applies to the warehouse and not to the accessory office. In the findings for parking in front of buildings, the finding currently says that you can only do it if there's no other feasible way to provide this parking. We're proposing to soften that a little bit to say the proposed parking spaces would result in an effective design solution improving livability, operational efficiency, or appearance. That mirrors the language in the exception to standards section of the code. And we propose adding a requirement for that dead-end maneuvering aisles in parking lots provide enough space for a car to turn around. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you come into a parking lot and at the very end of it there's like cars parked all the way up to the wall, and then you get there's no spaces for you and you have to turn around, but there's no place to turn around, so you have to kind of back up a bunch of times. So we're proposing just to add a provision that they have to provide some amount of space that's big enough for a car to turn around in. Not meaning like a cul-de-sac. You still have to make like a three-point turn, but there has to be enough room for that. We're also proposing, and I'll get, when I talk about the Planning Commission's comments, they clarified an important point about this. But currently our code says that 3% of spaces for hotels and apartments have to be EV charging stations, and that was based on the California Green Building Code that was in effect at the time that code was written. Well, The Cal Green Building Code has been ramping that up every 3 years. I think the last code cycle it was 8%, and this code cycle it's going to be 10%. So rather than having to go in and amend our planning regulations every time the Green Building Code gets updated, we propose simply tying the EV charging station requirement to whatever the Green Building Code requires. Okay, the Planning Commission held a study session on all of these issues on July 25th. And here are the points that they brought up that I'd just like to walk through with you. First, they were concerned about eliminating the minimum parking requirements. They had some thoughts about that. They were concerned that we wouldn't be able to require parking if we thought it might be necessary for a particular use. Disabled parking was something that we hadn't really thought about that they raised as an issue. Similarly, electric vehicle charging stations, if you have no parking, 3% of 0 is 0, so you wouldn't have any EV charging stations. Shared parking and transit alternatives are something that they would just like to see addressed. And they also had some thoughts on bicycle parking, micro-mobility, i.e. scooters, and TNCs, meaning like Uber and Lyft. So concerning the minimum parking requirement, they were concerned about eliminating it entirely. I would say of the 6 commissioners present, and at the time we had a vacancy on the commission, only 2 of them really fully endorsed eliminating the minimum parking requirement. The others expressed some concern about it for various reasons. And some of them said actually all of them said they were fine with reducing the minimum to below 33%, below the estimated demand, but not all the way to 0. And one commissioner said, well, why not make it 66% below the demand? The others didn't have any specific numbers. And if we were to do that, then parking would still be required. So then we wouldn't have to change all that mandatory language. Some commissioners suggested on the counter argument to that was that if the minimum was eliminated and developers didn't provide any parking, they might choose to use that money on other things like amenities for their residents and higher quality building materials. Concerning requiring parking where it looks like we think it might be necessary, the city really would have no ability to do that. And I pointed that out to the commissioners, even under CEQA, because parking is no longer considered a CEQA issue. So it can't be a CEQA mitigation measure. So, we'd basically be stuck. If we thought parking was needed for a project and the developer wasn't going to provide any and we didn't have a minimum parking requirement, we couldn't do anything about that. They'd have the right to not provide any parking. However, we did suggest we did note actually that optional condition of approval that I mentioned earlier on about requiring TDM measures for projects that provide less than the estimated demand. So they're not providing any parking at all. You could still put in their conditions that they have to promote alternative modes of transportation and maybe give us a plan for how they're going to do that. And I would say that frankly, recent experience that staff has had and things that have come before the commission and council that you've seen, we haven't had that problem of people not wanting to provide parking. In fact, they often want to provide more parking than they're required to provide, than they're allowed to provide. So I don't really foresee that we're going to have a whole lot of projects come in that aren't going to have any parking at all, although you never know. Concerning disabled parking, the disabled parking is based on the building code, not the planning regulations, and it's a percentage of all of the parking that is provided. Therefore, if you eliminate any parking, you eliminate disabled parking. So they were concerned about that. And one suggestion they had was, well, let's make the minimum requirement be 1 space. And then that 1 space has to be a disabled space. Because the code says, if you have 1 space, it's disabled. 1 to 10, then 1 space has to be disabled, and 10 to 20, then 2, or something like that. But it's always a minimum of 1. So if you have 1 space, it has to be a disabled space. And I would note also that assuming developers do still continue to voluntarily provide parking, they will have to provide disabled parking in accordance with the code. Concerning electric vehicle charging stations, it's kind of the same thing. They're a percentage of all parking that's provided, and if you don't provide any, then you don't have to provide any EV charging stations either. Again, there was a suggestion to have a few spaces so that you would have some as EV spaces. The code doesn't allow disabled spaces and EV spaces to be the same spaces. So if you want to have both, you'd have to require a minimum of 2 spaces. One can be the EV station and the other can be the disabled space. Also, if we tie it to the Green Building Code, as staff suggested, one of our commissioners apparently is a close reader of the building code and realized that what it actually says is those spaces have to be EV capable, meaning conduit essentially, not actual EV charging stations. And it was pointed out that if we're going to tie our code requirements to the Green Building Code, we should make it explicit that they actually have to be EV charging stations and not just EV capable. So that was a real good catch. I would also note that a number of businesses in the city have voluntarily provided EV charging stations. Right now, the code only requires it for multi-unit residential and hotels. And we've got a number of them in the city that are not associated with multi-unit residential or hotels. They're just doing it because they want to. And I would anticipate that would continue to be the case. Concerning shared public parking and transit alternatives, a number of commissioners pointed to a need for strategically located shared parking, especially for people who come into Emeryville and don't find transit convenient, not because we don't have good transit in Emeryville, but because they don't have good transit where they're coming from. So they don't have good transit at their origin. And they come in a car and we should have strategically located shared public facilities for that. We noted that the city can pursue this option as part of our capital improvement program, but it's really not something to address through the planning regulations. And concerning bicycle parking, micromobility, and transportation network companies, i.e. Uber and Lyft, there was a desire for some short-term bicycle parking to be in secure lockers in addition to racks. So we may want to consider if a use requires more than a certain number of bike parking, short-term bike parking spaces, that some of them be in lockers. There is a desire for safe parking for scooters. Not sure exactly what that means, but that comment was made. And there's also a desire for designated loading zones for Uber and Lyft and other TNCs so they don't block traffic when they're dropping people off and picking them up. So that was the Planning Commission's comments. And we now have a number of questions for you all. First of all, do you support the total elimination of the minimum parking requirement? Or alternatively, would you support a reduction to it below the current 33% level, but not all the way to 0? Do you support a requirement for projects of a certain size to provide a minimum number of disabled parking spaces, and likewise a minimum number of electric vehicle charging stations? Do you support the requirements for a certain amount of short-term bike parking to be in lockers, in addition to racks? What are your thoughts on the Planning Commission's other comments and proposals? Do you have any comments or suggestions on the various other planning regulation amendments that staff has proposed? And do you have any other proposals for modifications to the code that we haven't thought about? So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Any clarifying questions? Oh, Scott?
Okay, you said that very few projects have gone for today's minimum parking level. Has it been 1 or 2 projects? 10 projects? I'm just curious. As a percentage, guess, just take a ballpark.
The
guess.
minimum, you mean the 33% below? This primarily applies to the major development projects, of which there are not really all that many. I can give you an example of one that was a bit of an anomaly, which was the intersection at 3800 San Pablo Avenue. That project got both a conditional use permit to go below the minimum for the residential component of the project and a conditional use permit to go above the maximum for the commercial component of the project, because the developer felt that he didn't need all that parking for the residents. He was gearing the residential component to people who didn't have cars, and he wanted to go below the minimum. For the commercial part, he told us, and this is something we hear a lot from developers, philosophically, I'm fine with not having all this parking, but I can't market this space. if I don't have a certain amount of parking. And so he argued that he needed more parking for the commercial. I'd say where the minimum really becomes an issue is if someone is renovating an existing building and putting a different use in it. And it seems like a perfectly reasonable proposal, except that the planning regulations currently say if you have a change of use that triggers a conditional use permit, even if it's a minor conditional use permit, which it usually is, then you must provide parking. And sometimes those projects don't have any parking, or they have less than the minimum currently requires, which means the entire project has to go to the Planning Commission for approval of a use permit to go below the minimum. So I think the biggest impact is on these reuse of existing building projects. Other major development projects, I think they've mostly been within the allowable range. Sherwin-Williams, I believe, is within the allowable range between minimum and maximum. So.
Thank you.
You mentioned that in our current code, it says EV capable.
No, I'm sorry. That's what the green building code says.
The green building code.
Our code says EV stations.
Okay. And so EV capable would mean that they're not just conduits, they're ready?
No, I'm sorry. Let me back up and
Please
clarify that.
clarify that part for me.
We were proposing to tie our regulations to the green building code
Okay.
because of two things. One is they ramp up the requirement every 3 years. And just in order to keep up with that, it's easier just to tie it to that requirement rather than have to keep amending the code. Secondly, our code only requires it now for hotels and apartments. And if we tie it to the green building code, then it would require it for basically all uses. The problem with tying it to the green building code is that the green building code only requires EV capable. Our current code requires actual EV stations. So we would clarify if we're tying it to the green building code, but they have to be actual EV stations, not
Okay.
just EV capable.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other clarifying questions? Yes, Member Donahue.
The bike lockers that the Planning Commission talked about, did they have electricity in them so that the electric bikes would be charged? Did they specify?
They didn't
them?
specify that.
Okay.
Any other clarifying questions? All right, I will open it up for public comment at this time. Any public comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Jeff Sears, Worm Development. I'm also going to speak as the president of the TMA, just for a moment, to not take up two separate 3 minutes. This is a complicated issue. I'm not sure we have any great light to shine, other than we certainly think if any action is taken, you should think seriously how it relates to your on-street parking requirements that are sort of partially being rolled out and not totally rolled out all over the city, because this will clearly cause people to think, maybe I need parking, but I don't have to pay for it. I'll just let the street provide it. So I think you should just consider that together. If you do move to reduce the parking and there is a requirement for TDM, I encourage you to consider the Emeryville as one of those key TDM measures, and maybe consider how that might be a general condition to apply to projects, so that there really is a way. I mean, people need to come to these places somehow. So if people are going to have more flexibility not allowing cars to bring people, then we have to figure out what other way. And I think beyond that, it's just complicated, so I don't know how you'll come out with it. I'll be interested to hear.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to open it up for discussion. Maybe let's take these one by one since there are so many questions. So does the council support the total elimination of the minimum parking requirement, or do we support a reduction to the minimum parking requirement below the current 33% below estimated demand? Member Martinez.
I don't think we can answer this first question without going through the rest of the questions.
That's a really good point. Let's make this the seventh question. Question number 2, does the council support requirement for projects of certain size to provide a minimum number of disabled parking spaces? I certainly have an opinion on this. Does anyone else?
I think this is an item that we should think about. Like, does currently, the places that provide parking, what % of those disabled spots are actively being used? Does the planning director, look at that and measure going forward? Like we've specified the %, the ratio, and are they actively being used?
I don't know. I have not done any surveys on that. I know people are sometimes annoyed when the prime parking spaces right in front of a use are empty and they can't park there because they're designated for disabled. On the other hand, I see plenty of people using disabled parking spaces, but I would note that this is a California State Building Code requirement, and we don't have the ability to modify it. So it is what it is, and if any amount of parking that is provided, a certain percentage as set forth in the state code has to be disabled parking. I can't speak to the use, though. I don't really know.
Member Martinez?
I think I have more questions than answers tonight, so forgive me. Was the Planning Commission provided with the status or any data from other cities that have eliminated their parking requirements, like San Francisco or Hartford, Connecticut?
We did do a little mini survey of other cities around the country, and actually in Canada and Mexico also, that have eliminated the minimum parking requirement. You're talking about the disabled spaces now?
I'm mostly looking at in relation to the Planning Commission's questions on disabled parking and for EV chargers, because I think that those cities could give guidance in both of those areas. Because this is relatively fresh, even in those cities. So these are all issues that they're dealing with now, but they're certainly a step ahead of we are.
Sure. No, we did not specifically get that information from other cities that have eliminated the minimum. We can certainly look for it, though. We did provide the commission with the information about the other cities that we had, surveyed.
Right. And before we get into the rest of the questions, I'm just going to tell council now that I'm interested in sending this back to Planning Commission. But I think there's more data that they could use to make these decisions. They asked some really big questions that I don't think that on the fly the staff would have been able to answer necessarily out of thin air, but I think answers are out there. I will take my time right now to say that between the years 2000 and 2012, San Francisco's seen an 88% of households have been car-free of the 11,000 households that were added to San Francisco. So it's like, I don't know that our population exactly mirrors what's in San Francisco, but we certainly have a lot of the same population who live here, who work in San Francisco. So I would suspect that there are some similarities there. So I think that if we had census data, we would see that a lot of households in Emeryville strive to go car-free if they're not car-free already. And I think this is information that could inform, what our next steps are. I definitely want to give credence to the concerns raised around EV chargers and disabled parking spaces, but I don't know that we can just come up with the right answer here from thin air.
I can speak to San Francisco's ADA parking situation. In 2014, there was a big debate at a city level over whether or not to enforce 2-hour to 4-hour time limits for ADA parking, because they're phenomenally overutilized. And there was a large amount of disagreement over how those spaces were being used. Were people overusing their placards once they got them? Were they expired placards? The city did a lot of surveys and spent a ton of money and found that there's more placards by far than there are proportional parking spaces for the disabled community. And that is on par with my own experience having a disabled family member. There's simply not enough spaces most of the time. So this is the number one thing that when I read the staff report concerned me. I have a suggestion for how we could handle this. I don't like putting a minimum number of 2 disabled parking spaces for unknown largeness of projects. But what I do think we could do is uncouple it and have for both EV ready and ADA spaces, we could tie it to the current proportion of spaces per estimated demand and make that the requirement. So the same math applies.
Oh, okay.
So, if you currently have to have 5 for 100 and your estimated demand is 100 spaces, you still have to put in 5. You maybe don't have to put in any other parking, but you have to put in 5 of each of those. And I think then we have our same formula as we currently do of calculating demand for those spaces. We're just not putting in other spaces.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So then for EV stations, let's see. So we, for any given project, we would say, here was what the estimated demand is, regardless of whether you're going to actually provide any parking or not. Here's what the estimated demand is. Whatever the, say it's 100, whatever the California Building Code says you have to provide for, however many disabled spaces they say you have to provide for 100 spaces, you have to provide that.
Yes.
And whatever the Cal Green Code says you have to provide for EV charging stations, and I think you meant to say EV stations, not
Yes.
EV ready,
Yes.
right? You have to provide that number.
Yep.
And then that's all. You only have to provide the disabled and the EV.
Yes. So we have EV and ADA minimums and nothing else. That's my concept. Member Butters?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So thanks to staff for all your work on this and the Planning Commission. My opinion is probably predictable, as I asked for this agenda item a while ago. I support the mayor's request to go back to the state code guidelines for ADA accessible parking, and also to move beyond EV capable under the Green Building Code and have it be EV stations themselves. So I think those are both good solutions. I feel like a couple of these questions here are beyond the scope of what we had initially intended to discuss. I'm not opposed to discussing them further, but I want to take on the first question. I think the requirement should go to 0. And I really want to challenge the council to go there and give that direction. And I heard one of my colleagues say they want to see additional information, and I'm sympathetic to that. So if that's the process the majority wishes to undertake tonight, I will support that. But I spent last week in Vancouver at Railvolution, and I attended multiple workshops, as I have been doing for about a year and a half now, on parking demand, and actually saw the data for Hartford and Vancouver and Minneapolis and several other cities. And what they illustrated in these workshops was that as they removed the parking minimums, they saw this declining trend in terms of the number of spaces that were being proposed. That it was as if developers were like a little trepidatious at first, but then they would say, okay, where I'd normally put 100 spaces, maybe I'll put 85. And then the following 6-month period, they saw that number of requests went down. All of them consistently, it started going down, and they realized that you can develop a community in a way that incentivizes people to move into it without a vehicle, bike only or transit only, and that is the way to go. But to actually get people to start making those choices, you had to remove that floor and tell them they could go to 0. And so I support going to 0. I think that the climate depends on it. I think that safe streets depend on it. I think that urbanism depends on it. And I believe that it is the right thing to do, and it takes leadership in this space to do that. And I think this is a council that can do that. So those are my views on that issue. So on items 2 and 3, I already agree with the mayor's proposal. I think we should all agree with those 2 proposals. Short-term bicycle parking and secure lockers. I think.
Can we just stop it at 2 and 3 and then go back for number 4 once we get everyone?
Oh,
want to take them one at a time.
Yeah, so my final comments on that is I do have one more parking-related item, which is the only thing I disagree with in the draft language that the staff proposed is tied to 9-4.404H. And this is don't anyone take this personally, but I do have an issue with, I think the thing that kind of, let me find it here again. It's on page, oh, maybe it's not H. So the section, the part that allows for a minor conditional use permit to go above, which may be 407A3, I can't remember, to go above the current maximum, it says there can be a conditional use or minor permit request. That should be approved by the city council and not staff, that section. I think giving minor or conditional use permits or minor permits for adjustments below is something that some of this other section said, it could be an application to staff. I think if the policy and the goal here is to go lower on parking requirements, I think that somebody who wants to justify why they need more should come to the city council and make a public case for that. And that's my only comment.
Vice Mayor Pats?
So I think I want to follow up on, I know we're only going 1 to 3 at the moment. So I'll start at 1. I share Member Bowder's belief that we should go to 0. This is the idea of moving out of the car culture, which I, as a child of Southern California, very much grew up in. And I don't know if I can get along without a car. But it's about changing behavior, about changing the way we do transit, and really, I think you said it best when you mentioned the climate demands it. Whether it's an electric vehicle or a gas vehicle, it still requires energy inefficiencies. And for that reason, 2 and 3 fall right in line with me as not something that I think we need. I think we're either encouraging more infrastructure that's based on modern ways of getting around that fit the needs of the entire community, or we're not. If we start making carve-outs for an electric car or for disabled placards and things, I think we're not going to build the other infrastructure to support people getting around. And I thought about this because this was number 2 is where I stopped as well, of how do we ensure people who have mobility challenges are still able to get around? And to me, it's about making sure that other infrastructures are in place. The buses, the 5 to go, the other paratransit systems that are out there. And so while I support the spirit of those 2 ideas and would go along with the council, I still feel like if we're talking about moving to a transit model, to me, we're all coming on board and we want to make sure transit fits everybody. So that's my thoughts on that.
Member Donahue?
I have a number of ideas about this. I like the idea of going to 0 if we can provide a certain amount of disabled spaces. For example, certain quadriplegics need their van more than they need the 8 to go, or it's just like it is a real issue with that community, and I feel like we should not limit them to our city, not being able to take them into account. So I am partial to having a certain minimum amount of disabled parking, because I just think that it's a civil rights issue at that level. The other side I see in our transportation world around us growing every month is more people riding electric bikes. Electric bikes are inherently more efficient than electric cars, meaning you're transporting a lot less machine for moving a person. They're just inherently, even though they're not as greenhouse gas friendly as in today's world, a regular bicycle, they are fast becoming a major transportation machine that people are adopting in our environment. And I feel like our infrastructure is not taking this trend into account. They're heavier bikes, they need to be stored horizontally, and they need power to charge. And I think as a city, we should look at that reality as a growing trend and somehow get into our codes, maybe, to take that into account. And in general, bicycle parking in condos typically is so hard on especially smaller women who are not working out at the gym, because they're typically making you take a bike proportionally heavier to your body mass than men have, and you have to lift it up and put it on a hook in a tight space, and I just think that discourages bicycle riding. We have to be better than that as a city. We have to make sure that bicycles are ergonomically excellent to park and come and go efficiently, and I just think we're falling down on that job. And if we're trying to provide for eliminating cars, let's make sure that we make the other side of the equation easier in that way. So, okay, those are my ideas.
Oh, Member Martinez had it first.
I just wanted to clarify my position that I am not interested in having a parking minimum for regular automobiles. My only concern was for the EVs and for the disabled spaces, and more for the disabled spaces than the EVs. So if the mayor's proposal is, one that we can all move along with, I will support that.
Thank you.
and
I'd also
go
like
to
to clarify
zero.
that you can lift a bike up a flight of stairs.
My bike is medium heavy, but I've been lifting, so.
Me too.
Well, you two are working,
Carry bikes.
you're going to the gym on a regular basis, both of you.
Yeah, I go now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I just ask a clarifying question of Councilmember Bowder's previous comment?
Sure.
You mentioned section,
I got to find the right section for each.
yeah, it was 9404
I find it.
H.
Let me see if I can-
94404H, where you referenced that you'd need a minor conditional use permit to go above the maximum. I don't,
Maybe F or 403. Hold on.
well, I think the staff proposal would be to leave it as it is now, which is going above the maximum still requires a major conditional use permit.
Oh.
Where does it say that?
Well, in H, it says parking spaces above the maximum are allowed, may be provided upon the granting of a conditional use permit. Then you have to go to the administrative section of the code in Chapter 7, where it defines major and minor conditional use permits. And one of the things on the list of major use permits is parking above the maximum. And we're not proposing to change that. But we don't have that in,
So like under 94.403A 1B or A, it says there, so the very first section there under parking, the last sentence says they may be reduced in number or eliminated entirely upon the granting of a minor. So some places in this code we're using the word minor, and some
Yes.
places we're not.
Yes.
And that's the thing I want to have
that's
cleared up.
intentional. To reduce or eliminate the parking, we are proposing it be allowed with a minor use permit
Which I'm fine with.
by staff.
Yes.
So if that would, for example, if we still had a minimum requirement and somebody wanted to reuse a building and they couldn't do it because they didn't have enough parking and that kicks it to the planning commission, that could be now done at a staff level. Or the example I gave of a previously entitled building that says 50 spaces in its conditions of approval and they want to reduce that to less than 50 spaces, that could be done by staff. Increasing the parking, we would propose remain a major conditional use permit.
And that,
So-
and increasing the parking is, just to be clear, is under 404H.
Yes,
And it says the granting, so when it's a major permit, it comes to the council
planning commission. All major conditional use permits go to the planning commission.
and they're appealable to the council?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I'll leave it the way it is then in light of that. So my additional add-on comments, I actually want to, before I say anything else, I want to really applaud and appreciate Vice Mayor Patz's comments. After hearing everybody else support the mayor's proposal, I really appreciate you saying that because I agree with you at a very cerebral level. That is exactly the right mentality, and that's why this city is a leader on this issue. And I appreciate you saying those things because if we do keep carving out spaces for exceptions, we do deprive transit of the investment it needs, and that's a huge problem. And the points Member Donahue made and the mayor have made are good points. And this was something that was, as recently as last week, I attended a workshop on this issue as well. And there was a discussion about how we've designed so much of society around the car culture that people who were in planning, who worked with people on ADA compliant infrastructure, commented about how even something as simple as a fast food restaurant, the drive-in is originally designed for people who have mobility issues, so they don't have to get out of a car. And I don't know the 8-to-go ever going into a drive-in, right, a drive-through. And so they talked about how changing, just how some people couldn't fathom like that there wasn't really, so much of the built environment doesn't right now adequately address the needs of people. And so I think where you're speaking is where I want to see us go to. And so I really wanted to just lift up and appreciate what you said because I think that's important. And it makes me rethink the EV piece a little bit, because cars on the road with other cars is still traffic, and it still creates pollution, regardless of whether or not you're reducing your footprint. The neighbor next to you in the lane next to you is still polluting. But I will go along with the mayor's. I really want to appreciate what you said, because I agree with you though. But I want to go along with the mayor's proposal on number 2 and 3, and I'm happy to hear everybody does support going to 0, and I think that we should give that direction tonight and not wait, because the time is now.
Thank you. You know, I really hear what you're saying about just the EV stations. From my lived experience, I do think providing adequate disabled parking spaces, if you have a kid with special needs, moving them around is just so incredibly difficult, and we are not there yet in terms of fully accessible transit systems. And so that's, I mean, yes, it's not the most efficient thing in the world, but it's necessary. For EV stations, what Scott said about e-bikes really pinged me. And I thought about what we do for the motorcycles, where it's 4 motorcycle spaces equal 1 regular parking space. And I would be open to doing something like, if you want to provide, you have to provide X number of EV charging stations, but you can provide 4 e-bike stations in lieu of 1 of your EV charging station. Now, I don't know if there's infrastructure anywhere in the code for e-bike charging stations yet, but God, I would like to see them.
We can add it. No, there's not now, but,
Does anyone have them?
well, in City Hall, there's certainly staff who have them.
No, but are there such a thing anywhere as
the
an
charge,
e-bike
you mean
charging
the charging station? I
Yeah.
think it's just a plug.
Just a plug. It's cheaper, right? We could throw out, people will throw out a plug.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes having secure spaces that you can park your electric bike in, you know, requires a different architectural setup to access it.
It's a thought. I do think we're on consensus about the scheme for 2 and 3, if we're comfortable moving forward from there. Let's go to 4. Does the council support requirement for a certain amount of short-term bicycle parking to be in secure lockers in addition to bike racks?
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. I regret that I'm a little ignorant on this, but in terms of the space that's consumed by putting a locker out versus a standalone free rack, like, is there a ratio of, if you were to have, 20 unsecured lockers, does that equate to like 15 secured lockers in terms of space use?
I don't have that number. There is in the code some diagrams of the, well, it's actually, what it illustrates is secure parking, but not in a locker. It's interior parking in a secure room that would have a bike rack. Well, it has a diagram of bike racks, what the minimum dimensions for bike racks are, and then it shows a diagram of a room with bike racks in it. Usually lockers, I believe, can handle 2 bikes, because they usually have a diagonal divider down the middle, and you can open it from either side. But I suspect they take up more space than racks do, but I can't tell you what the ratio is.
Yes, Member Martinez.
Charlie, has staff checked in with Transform for best practices on, the balance of how much secure parking can be provided? As I'm all for secure bike parking, but I think it's good to check in with what the balance is on the bottom line, but not necessarily from developers, but an organization like Transform could tell us what makes sense for both the municipality and the developer,
Yeah.
in terms of how far can we push that envelope and what can we ask.
I happen to know a former council member who used to work at
Yes,
Transform.
I know her too. Actually, I know 2 former council members. Like one, well, Jennifer West is not at Transform anymore. She's at
I know.
Stop now.
Who's the other
But Ann Chang.
Oh, okay. Well, she wasn't a council member, but
No,
yes.
well, in El Cerrito she was.
Oh, all right.
I'd like to point out that one of the things that got brought up at BPAC last meeting was the fact that they hadn't gotten to weigh in on this, and bicycle parking is a major proportion here. My proposal would be that this goes to BPAC before it comes back as a possible ordinance, so we can get some of their input here. They felt very strongly that they should have input, and I agree with them.
May I ask, what are the bicycle sections that we're talking about amending here? What numbers are they? They in the code, in the draft you have in front of us?
94.408 is
408.
is the section on bicycle parking. So So anything related to bicycle parking is in section 94408.
Similar to your request to uncouple things from the green building code, I would be okay with 9.4.408 going to the BPAC and having their input on that, but I don't want to hold up making zero parking minimum a thing if we can do that. I think we should do that because they're going to do a revisit to the bike plan in the spring, and I think we should just let them have all these issues at one time. And so I think that might be that would be okay because we have good bike requirements now, and we're looking to basically upgrade those, and I think that's fine, but I would ask that we don't slow down car parking issues.
I agree. What about the fact, though, that it's currently coupled proportionally? Can we go ahead and uncouple those?
Well, we could adopt what the staff have recommended for right now, and it's no harm to change it in the future. If they really feel that there's an error in this, we can just communicate to them that this was what we did to make sure it came along. But I'm not opposed to making changes based on what BPAC's recommendations are in the future, if anyone else is.
When does BPAC meet?
First Monday of every month?
Sorry, my calendar's off in my head. Do we meet on the, so they would meet before we would meet again?
No, the September 30th, we meet October 1st, they meet September 30th is
The
a
first
Monday,
does fall on a
so it'd be
Tuesday.
the
That's where my
following-
calendar is
yeah.
failing me.
Well, but based on what we hear from you tonight, it sounds like you're ready for us to write an ordinance, or almost there anyway,
Yeah.
to take to the planning commission for a recommendation, right? And then it wouldn't be coming back to you until after that happened.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, no, I think we have some time on all of this. So I think, I support uncoupling it, because I think there's more than one thing to uncouple. But I also think, as this is just a study session, we have a lot of time to get some more input. Really, I mean, I think getting it back October 1st would be optimistic.
So, Madam Mayor, just procedurally, we need to return to the Planning Commission for their recommendation on the ordinance itself.
Right.
I think it could be possible to have the BPAC review and give its recommendation to the council, since it's advisory to the council, on the same ordinance that staff would be presenting to the Planning Commission. We won't be coming back, certainly in October, with that ordinance, I wouldn't think, in any event.
Coupled or uncoupled.
Either way,
Right.
whatever the council's preference is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we want to get input from BPAC on bike-related things. Number 5, what are council's thoughts on the planning commission's other comments and proposals related to the parking provisions of planning regulations?
Would it be possible to have those up for a moment? I'm sorry.
That would be useful.
Yeah.
They had quite a few
Yeah.
comments. Oh, way down here. Sorry.
No worries.
Member Bowders?
I support the recommendation about the parking where it's needed, the TDM approach. I think that's the right approach, so that if there's a proposal that really is missing the mark, it authorizes the staff and the planning commission to recommend transit alternatives, which we do already. The planning commission does those in many cases, but I think that putting that in here is a good idea. I think we've covered most of the other things. The only the one that I'll say anything about, and the mayor is really the expert on this, and I've been privileged to work with her on it, is TNCs. The one thing that I feel strongly about is that we should be geofencing TNCs, and that we should make time, not immediately, but we should put that on the agenda in the future to talk about how TNCs are undermining transit systems by having people pull into bus lanes to pick people up, and how that is undercutting transit delivery, and whether or not there should be limits on those zones or fees tied to that to help subsidize the transit system for people who can't afford to take TNCs, but who are stuck in a transit zone that's being impacted by them.
I share your concerns. We had a discussion about some of the legal things going on with that this morning, and I would be happy to consider that as a separate issue.
Yeah,
Because I think
separate.
it's a complex beast of its own. Okay. Any other, I support the TDMs, just like Councilmember Bowder said. Is there consensus around that?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think that answers that question, unless anybody else has anything else on it. All right, can we go back to our question screen? We got to get you a remote.
That's okay. Oops.
All right. Number
6.
6. Does the council have any comments or suggestions on other planning regulation amendments proposed by staff?
I think we've hit those already.
I think we hit them.
Covered it, right?
We covered them all. Charlie, did we cover them all? Yeah.
I think so.
All right, does the council have any additional proposals for modifications to planning regulations related to parking? That's nothing I want to throw in at this moment.
No, I like what we've come up with.
Yeah, I do. I think this is great. I'm really grateful to all the time staff put in on it. I do want to think, not today, but just put out there for the future thought that we should find ways to incentivize people to do this too. Not just offer it to people. We should think about how, and whether that means we talk about our bonus point system in a way that favors these types of approaches to start getting people to try it. Because everything I've read and had presented to me about this process is it's a gradual process and people adapt to it over time. And we're not as big of a city as Minneapolis or Hartford, so we're not going to see the number of projects come through as quickly as they did to start seeing that trend happen. And I think there might be ways through the development bonus point system to incentivize this. So just a thought.
I think one of the major benefits of this we haven't even discussed is that it can lower the price of housing. It costs more for developers to build these parking spaces.
Yes, it does.
And one of the big incentives is it's cheaper for them to make projects with less parking spaces. So hopefully some of the internal incentives will work here when people do the math on they can offer apartments for $100 less a month than their competitors. Have we given adequate direction for the ones we have
Absolutely.
answered?
This has been really helpful.
Okay.
Everyone feel comfortable and good with
Thank
it?
you.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited about this. Okay. I think that wraps us. I'm going to adjourn this study session. It is 7:22 p.m. I'm going to call to order the City of Emeryville as a successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency meeting. Do we need to call the roll again?
No,
All still
Madam
here?
Mayor.
All here. Can I get an approval of the final agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We've got a motion by Member Martinez. We've got a second by Vice Mayor Pats. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Any ex parte communications to share? None for me? Nope. Seeing none. Any public comment for consent agenda items or items not on this agenda? We're on the blue one. Yes, success. No, we're successor agency. Okay. Nothing for this. Great. Consent calendar. Can we get a motion for consent?
Move a consent.
Second.
No motion by Member Bouders. We've got a second by Vice Mayor Pats. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. There's no action items, so this meeting is adjourned. All right, it is 7:16 p.m., or sorry, 7:23 p.m. We're only a few minutes late. I'm going to call to order the City of Emeryville regular city council meeting. We don't need to call the roll. I believe we're all still here. I will make a note to the public that the public hearing item for the noise waiver ordinance on 4300 San Pablo Avenue has been canceled. It's not going to be on tonight. Can I get an approval of the final agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We've got a motion by Vice Mayor Pats, a second by Member Bouders. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Special orders of the day. We have a presentation by East Bay Mud. Mr. Katz. Welcome. Oh, Ty's running over.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Medina and members of the Emeryville City Council. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with the City Council members about what's happening with the East Bay Municipal Utility District. Can you hear me all right with the mic?
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that people at home are able to hear. We do have an exciting presentation about what's been happening because our utility district has been through quite a lot over the last decade. We've had the majority of years that I've served on the board have been during drought years. This is my 13th year serving the communities of Berkeley, Emeryville, Albany, in the northern portion of Oakland, El Cerrito, and Kensington. That's Ward 4. And we do a lot as an agency. We serve 1.5 million ratepayers and customers here in the East Bay, including Emeryville. As you know, water and water treatment, the sanitation services that we provide are the backbone of civilization. We could not have our urban communities without it. And East Bay Mud has a proud history of serving Alameda and Contra Costa counties to protect San Francisco Bay and to serve 1.5 million people for water, about 700,000 people for wastewater. Do I push this button to go to the, let me see if this works, it does. So your water begins as snowmelt in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So if you've heard of Alpine Spring Water, which is a bottled water branding tool, we actually have our water falling as snow in Alpine County. So that's where we get our water from. It falls as snow in Alpine County. It comes as runoff through the McCullummy River, which straddles Calaveras to the south and Amador County to the north. So the McCullummy River flows into Pardee Reservoir. You can see in the middle graphic there. That's where we store our drinking water. And then we do have another reservoir, Comanche Reservoir, just below Pardee, where we use for flood control, where we also use that to make sure that we're good stewards of the lower McCullummy River, to make sure that there's fish that continue to thrive in a fishery just below Comanche Reservoir. Our drinking water comes to us through the McCullummy aqueducts, and it travels for about over 100 miles to get from that community near Pardee Reservoir out to us where it's treated in the East Bay. Most of our water is treated in Orinda, but we also do have treatment plants in Walnut Creek. So our water supply is in excellent condition for the next 2 years, but we always think about drought being on the horizon. So we've taken steps to secure drought supplies by partnering with neighboring communities. So we partnered with Sacramento County to make the Freeport Regional Water Project. So during drought years, we have a contract with the federal government Central Valley Project to take dry year supply in limited quantities from an intake at Freeport off of the Sacramento River. And we also are exploring a groundwater pilot with San Joaquin County. The groundwater pilot with San Joaquin County is pretty historic. For decades, San Joaquin County's position was to not allow exports. So they viewed that it was urban versus farm, and that it was just not appropriate for there to be exports of any kind out. Meanwhile, the land in the San Joaquin Valley, like it has in much of the Central Valley, subsided dozens and dozens of feet. And so imagine the infrastructure damage to those local communities when the land subsidence literally collapsed the soil. And once that storage collapsed, once that land collapsed, that storage can never be brought back. So we've been able to break through that logjam and get to an agreement where we would be able to bank groundwater, share some of the water that's banked in the very wettest of wet years, and be able to get some of that water back as storage. So I'm glad that we've been able to actually have a solution to the surface storage versus groundwater storage debate, at least in this corner of the San Joaquin Valley in the northern portion. So we've been able to continue down that path towards a compromise there. So we have also provided wastewater services for 685,000 East Bay residents to protect public health and San Francisco Bay by making sure that the wastewater that comes through our septic pipes gets treated at the main wastewater treatment plant. I know that Emeryville is a part of the odor sphere for what can happen at the wastewater treatment plant, and we do have odor protection projects on the horizon to to help primarily the community of West Oakland, which is the closest to the plant, but we know that Emeryville would benefit from that as well. So we do have that in our capital budget, but we must protect San Francisco Bay to make sure that we don't have biological hazards or other metals that could be dumped improperly down the toilets and other drains. So we also aim to recover energy resources. We were the first wastewater utility to convert the methane that comes out of our wastewater gas to renewable energy. We also are doing that with food, and I definitely would invite the city of Emeryville, as you're looking at how to divert waste and to get to zero waste. When you look at your food stream, think about how can commercial food waste be diverted to East Bay Mud's main wastewater treatment plant so that we could incorporate it into our resource recovery program. We're able to put that food into the same stream where the wastewater is digested, and we were able to recover that renewable energy that's embedded in the food. If food were just to simply decompose in a landfill or even in a composting yard that's not properly managed, which many of them are, that methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. So I would invite further discussions between our staff and your public works staff as you look at zero waste goals. And also your climate action plans. But most importantly, this is to make sure that the water that's being discharged from the plant that is protective of San Francisco Bay. We want to make sure that we are engaging the public to understand also how what weather events are impacting regional infrastructure in the Bay. Emeryville is at the bottom of the basin here. This is where a lot of stormwater flows are coming down from up from the hills down towards the Bay. I recognize that. And it also means that we have a lot of wet weather flows that are flowing through the whole system, particularly from the older communities. We are working very closely with all of the communities in the area under the consent decree with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. But we want to make sure that we are making progress on that consent decree to make sure that we are protecting San Francisco Bay and not allowing the wet weather flows that get into the cities. Not necessarily, every city has a unique profile. I think the older communities have a larger profile than the newer communities, but we know that the wet weather facilities or the wet weather events are pushing a lot more stormwater into the stormwater drains, and they're leaking into the wastewater system. A lot of this happens, you can see in the graph here about the typical sewer connection. This is for homeowners, and I know much of Emeryville is larger apartment buildings and condominiums. But there are a number of single-family homes and duplexes and fourplexes in Emeryville. And for those neighborhoods, we already do require that there be a permit at the point of sale so that we can make sure that these laterals that are maintained by homeowners, but not always the best. And over the years, these laterals have gotten leaky and have degradation in them. And at these wet weather events, the storm water gets in and pushes the sewage through into our system. So additional water is flowing into the wastewater system during these wet weather events. And at the extreme, this is why we have this consent decree, why we have this program. At the extreme, a very severe storm, which is happening more frequently with climate change. We're seeing more severe storms affecting our system. But these big wet weather events, if we don't control it, could have the potential to push raw sewage into the bay. So that's the purpose of this program, is to make sure that we protect the bay and don't have raw sewage going into the bay. So that's why we have this retrofit on point of sale ordinance. And I am interested in working creatively with cities that find it to be the best solution for them. I would like to invite cities to work with us. If you think that it would make sense to have a community level reinvestment rather than waiting for each homeowner to go one by one, I would invite that conversation, because we did do the math and we found that if a community were to get ahead of it and do the whole lateral at once, perhaps rolling the money onto the fees that are paid by the homeowners, perhaps finding the money in your own budgets. But I think this would be eligible to have a fee recovery. But we are able to save 25% of the cost of doing this rather than each homeowner doing it one by one. So there are some reasons why we could sorry, we did have some feedback with the broadcast, but we would be able to save money, avoid additional digging up of the streets, which ironically does cause pollution to the bay. So these are some public benefits of this type of approach. It's not required by US EPA, it's just a choice, and it's something that I would invite further discussion if your council or your staff were interested in that. Otherwise, we are participating with other partners around the bay to study nutrients in the bay, to make sure that we are looking at what the impacts of our large communities' discharges are, to make sure that we're the biological effects of dumping a lot of wastewater into the bay is still keeping the bay healthy. So we're monitoring the nutrient quality. We're also continuing expansion of our recycled water projects for irrigation, industrial uses, and other non-potable applications to meet our goal of 20 million gallons a day by 2040. Emeryville has done a wonderful job of using recycled water for irrigation. The Pixar site uses our recycled water because our recycled water runs straight from the wastewater treatment plant along the I-80 corridor. So many large commercial customers that have irrigation have chosen to hook into our recycled water. So it's really excellent that so many Emeryville customers were pioneers of our recycled water program. We've heard a lot about water quality and lead sampling in schools, and particularly in our public outreach events. One of the number one thing that customers are coming up to our public information booth to talk about is lead. The good news is that East Bay Mud's pipes have been lead-free for decades. So we took the initiative to make sure that our pipes were lead-free. We sponsored state and then federal legislation, which is now law, that means that you can't buy, whether you're a large utility or a homeowner, you can't buy a lead pipe anymore. There's no more lead pipes. So the fraction of lead is so de minimis that the scientists at EPA have concurred that it's lead-free. So we were a leader in this effort, but we still know that there's older buildings, and particularly schools, have this. So what we did is we tested schools in our service area, and the schools in Emeryville, we have confirmed that there are no there isn't exposure out of the samples that we tested in Emeryville schools. We did find issues around the East Bay Mud service area, so those were serious problems for the kids in those schools. I'm glad that the state required us to do this, even though they didn't provide us funding. We found funding in our budget. But we also do provide this service for any residential customer that's concerned that they might be getting exposed to lead. So certainly a newer building, a building that was built during the suburbanization boom of World War II and beyond. So many of the new condominiums that are in Emeryville are very unlikely to have lead exposure. But some of the older buildings that are in Emeryville's low-density residential neighborhoods, those are older buildings, and we don't have an exact framework in terms of what years of construction does this predominate or not. We don't know that for sure. But we're certainly not the public health agency that the county might be responsible for, but just to be just to do an extra step for our customers. We know that customers are thinking about East Bay Mud when they think about their water, so we make this service available for free. So any customer that's concerned about lead in their older home can call our number 1-866-40-EBMUD and ask for a free test of their home water to see if there's unhealthy lead levels in their water that they're drinking. This wouldn't be coming from East Bay Mud's water pipes, it would be coming from inside the home, and remediation would be the responsibility of the homeowner or the landlord. But we want to make sure that we promote public health, and we know that this is important to do. Climate change is critical. We are making sure that we are reducing our emissions. You can see our current goal and progress towards that goal. we know that climate change is real. It poses serious risks to all of us, and that means more intense droughts, more intense storm periods that cause wildfire threats and flooding. It can mean impacts to our water quality. It was surprising that during this extreme drought, we started to have algae issues. While there isn't necessarily a health issue, it's an aesthetic taste issue. And because of the increased heat levels at the intake portion where we had to take water during the final year of the last drought, we discovered that there were real taste and odor issues from the point that we had to do that water intake. We're making modifications. We're adapting. We're looking at where could we put our intake for the future, knowing that this could be the new normal. We're looking at oxidation treatment so that we can get rid of those taste and odor issues the next time we face a drought this severe. It also means natural resource management challenges. We had a very severe wildfire right in our watershed, and we were putting sandbags to make sure that the runoff from that fire didn't get into our river, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't have ash flowing into the river that we're going to drink our water right out of. So climate change poses these serious threats, and it means management of our natural working lands, but it also means doing our part to make sure that we're reducing our carbon footprint. So we're subscribed to East Bay Clean Energy for almost all of our accounts. We're working with East Bay Clean Energy and Marin Clean Energy to talk about the accounts that we're not signed up in to accelerate the transition to clean energy. And we're also looking at how can we do more in mitigation. So our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas indirect emissions to zero by 2040 for electricity, and to cut in half our direct emissions by 50% compared to the year 2000. And as a member of the board, I'm advocating that we reevaluate that goal and make it even more ambitious, but that's been our goal for the last few years. We're also ramping up our pipe replacement. And you can see on this chart that we were pretty steady in our pipe replacement, just below around 8 miles of pipe. System-wide, we have 4,200 miles of pipe in the whole system. And the pipe material that we use is designed to last about 100 years. So if you do the math, we were falling way behind in terms of keeping our infrastructure in a state of good repair. And we started to have real consequences to that. There was a major wake-up call that I think really got me to pay more attention to this issue in around the end of the last decade, where Emeryville had a major industrial customer. I think we know that biotechnology is very important for Emeryville's economy here, and it's important for the whole regional economy to attract laboratory services to make sure that that they're thriving in your city, and they employ a lot of people around our communities. But they can't work without reliable water supply. And when a main break happened that affected them, they lost a lot of investment, and it caused serious disruption to their operations. Enough that it could have been an issue of regional competitiveness. I'm proud to say that East Bay Mud reacted swiftly and replaced about 3,500 feet of pipe in and around the city of Emeryville, targeted at the areas that were failing. So we made sure that for the biotechnology companies and any other portions of the city of Emeryville that were failing, after that main break, we took a complete look at Emeryville's pipes, and I believe that pipeline rebuild really started in Emeryville because of that. That was a big wake-up call that it's not just disrupted neighborhoods, it's not just the businesses, it's knowing that our whole system, it's not just the water losses that affect how much fresh water we lose during a big main break event. It's really about keeping our system in a good state of repair. So we're now ramping up towards 40 miles of pipe per year. So that's our goal, to ramp it up. We need to onboard crews. They need to understand what they're doing when they're engaging in a very skilled craft. So we can't go from 10 to 40 overnight. But you can see that this chart is both where our historical replacements have been as well as our actuals. And our projections are to be repairing about 22 to 23 miles of pipe per year in the coming budget cycles, on the way to 40 miles per year. Just to let you know where those streets that the most of the pipeline replacements were completed, some of the major streets where those were completed include Ocean Avenue, Horton Street, Park Avenue, and 67th Street. At the moment, we feel like Emeryville's pipes are in good shape. We did a full survey at the time that we did this work. And so we don't have any planned replacements in Emeryville since we prioritized so many main replacements over the last decade. But if there is a main break, I get a daily report of every main break in the service area every morning. I find out what's happening in the community. If there are residents or any of you that are concerned that there's been a particular main that seems weak, that's had a break, let's talk about it, and we would definitely be happy to make sure that we are keeping Emeryville's pipes in a good state of repair. We're also investing with your dollars to make sure that this pipeline rebuild effort brings cost-effective savings throughout the district so that we're able to keep our whole system in a good state of repair. That includes not just the pipes, but our treatment plant upgrades, replacement of other key infrastructure. East Bay Mud was formed just after the Great Depression, and we're starting to reach that point where the infrastructure that was built for our communities is starting to ail. So we're making sure that we are keeping everything in a good state of repair for safety, reliability, and water quality. That also does mean that we've had rate increases. So we've had significant rate increases over the last decade. However, some of those rate increases have, while they've outpaced inflation, they have also kept, they take into account that we've had some serious changes to the economy. We also had major droughts. So the average customer has seen their bill increase by about 5% per year. That looks at the total bill, taking into account that customers actually used a lot less water. Even though we have even though we might have less water that we're producing for customers during and after a drought, that we still have the same 4,200 miles of pipe to keep in a good state of repair. I want to address the customer assistance program that I believe the council may be asked to make some authorizations on going forward. East Bay Mud charges water rates that are below the median of our comparison water agencies. So I'm proud that we are providing water that's affordable for most customers and that it's below the median of our regional neighbors. We know that it's not affordable for everybody. And for low-income customers, people struggle with every single bill that they pay. We want to make sure that we are providing that discount to people in every way that they need it. So we right now provide a 50% water discount on the bill for customers who qualify at about 214% of the poverty line. It's the same threshold as PG&E's CARE program, and I believe East Bay Clean Energy does carry that threshold over. And we also have a 35% discount on the wastewater flow and other charges. So those are our discounts for qualifying customers. But we hear a lot from our customers that a large portion of the bill is actually the city's sewer fee. So I respectfully would ask that Emeryville allow East Bay Mud to provide this discount automatically so that the residents don't have to manually reapply. Right now, it's actually a very small handful of customers affected by this in Emeryville. We understand it's really just about a dozen people or a dozen households who are in this situation. It could be more over time, but just by virtue of who's currently enrolled in our program, we're taking this conversation to the other cities that have city-level fees, Oakland and Berkeley, because we want to make it easier for customers to access affordable water. And it's a very troubling conversation every time somebody is trying to decide between paying their water bill to keep the water on and paying another bill that they may need, like food or medicine or electric utilities. So these are very difficult conversations that our customer service staff have. That's why we've extended this generous discount to make sure that low-income customers can afford water. We'd like to see a smooth system across all of the fees that our customers see on their bill so that they can truly afford to pay the whole East Bay Mud bill, which includes the city's fee that's passed along on our bill. We look forward to continuing this discussion and partnering with the city to extend this benefit. But and if you do hear of people in the community who you think would benefit, the threshold is approximately 214% of the poverty line, which can vary based on the amount of household members there are. Anyone can get more information by calling our number, 866-40-EBMUD, to ask for an application and to get qualified. We want more needy customers who qualify to apply and get the benefits that we've approved. The last major topic I'll share with you tonight is preparing for public safety power shutoffs. I've given this presentation to several other cities in my ward, and so while we're still in the middle of fire season, no doubt, we're already prepared. PG&E notified us pretty unilaterally that they intended to reserve the right to shut off electric power to any of their customers that they felt like they would need to be able to be prepared for the wildfire season. That could extend well beyond our service area. It could be anywhere, really, not just our distribution circuits, but it could be anywhere where we depend on electric power in PG&E service area. So we might not have a lot of notice about it, and I think there are a lot of public safety challenges in terms of individual health and safety, people with disabilities and other things that are outside of what East Bay Mud deals with. I think there's a lot of public matters that are beyond East Bay Mud's portion of this. But we did rapidly get ready to make sure that we would be able to ensure reliable water supply as soon as we found out about this. It does come to a cost to the district. So to make sure that we have the water flowing at a limited level, we had to procure $400,000 just to rent backup a diesel power supply. I'm very interested in exploring if this is the new normal, finding clean technology. So if we're able to find reliable, clean technology to get through this type of thing, if we're going to need this on a permanent basis, that's something that I'm exploring. I think but we have no choice. We are not able to just simply cut off the water because there's a power outage. We're able to get through this, but it does come to a measurable cost. And it also means that we don't have an unlimited water supply. If we run out of the diesel that's powering the pumping plants, that's putting water into the storage tanks at the top of our hills, eventually that runs out. Eventually we're out of the water that's in that tank. Eventually we are out of the diesel that's pumping the backup generator. So during an event, it's important that we are able to educate our customers about the need to conserve water. So when you hear about a PG&E public safety power shutoff, that also means conserve water, because we'll be running off of backup diesel generation. So we ask that if you have public safety messages during this event, that you include water conservation as a key message. We'll be keeping our website and our Twitter and Facebook accounts up to date with our understanding of the status of a PSPS event. And I'm proud of our agency for being able to get prepared very quickly. We responded nearly immediately with an RFP. Also, this is a reminder that when there are emergency events, that residents have enough stored water on hand, 1 to 2 gallons per person per day, enough to last 3 to 7 days. It's important not just for PSPS events, but for any possible earthquake that could interrupt water supply. So we really urge customers to do that. It appears that only about half of our customers are prepared with emergency backup personal water supply. So we do encourage people to follow us on Twitter at EBMUD, and on Facebook. We definitely need public cooperation to ensure that we maintain our critical water supplies. For more information, we have that at ebmud.com/emergency-preparedness. So let's dig into questions. Water continues to be the best value around, and EBMUD's water is some of the best in the state. And for more information, you can check out our website, ebmud.com, and I'm happy to take any questions now, as well as I'm accessible for questions from you or the public. Anytime I'm happy to help. I can be emailed at andy.katz@ebmud.com, and would be happy to take your questions here tonight.
Thank you so much, Director Katz. Are there any questions from up here? Member Donahue?
Given how your agency is so important, that it seems to me that your needs for electricity supersede PG&E. And the PUC should grant East Bay Mud and your right-of-way the ability to generate and transmit your own power separately from everyone else. It just seems like it's a safety issue. And since you have a right-of-way coming a great distance across the state, you probably could do wind and solar and just literally avoid PG&E because it would be safer if you did. So
I think that's a reasonable thing to have us look into. It's a complicated distribution grid, and so if any of that traverses portions of the Contra Costa County or Alameda County that could also be included in a wildfire hazard zone, we have to look at those operations. But I think we have a lot of distributed generation opportunities locally. A lot of our electricity needs are further up in elevation, close to residences. So thinking about the costs of building a microgrid, the costs of that distributed generation, the likelihood of the shutoffs, and the alternatives of getting clean storage power that's battery storage. I think these are all things to weigh. So we actually have in-house electrical engineers because of our operations running the hydroelectric dams and selling power out of our renewable gas at the wastewater treatment plant. So I think we do have the expertise in-house to do some of this analysis, and I look forward to sharing those suggestions. Thank you.
Any other questions? Member Martinez.
Thank you, Director Katz, for your presentation. Earlier, you were talking about food resource recovery, and I assume that's to mean folks using their garbage disposals at home rather than putting stuff into the green bin. So my question for you is if you're aware of any analysis as to whether that is more efficient at recovering methane. And then my part two of that question is the cost to the ratepayers.
Yes, we actually did work with a team of MBA students at Presidio's Green MBA school, and they did an analysis of, for residential food scraps, what the energy value is of having a customer dispose of their organic food waste down their residential drain, taking care to not put fat, oil, or grease down the drain because that could damage your homes, drains, and the East Bay Mud system. But barring that, just putting food down the drain where it will go to the treatment plant, but also looking at the energy cost for having to treat that additional food in the wastewater. And they actually found it was a net positive in terms of more energy generation if they were comparing different scenarios. I didn't see that.
I guess the effects on the ratepayer for using that extra water to run their disposal versus, I'm looking at my waste management bill right now, and right now we get, the waste bin for free. If people are properly composting at home, they're not paying money for that. So I want to be able to tell people, there's a reason to use your garbage disposal, and it is X, Y, and Z. Rather than throwing it into the green bin for free, which I hope people are doing, one of these things, and that they're not putting organic waste in the trash.
Absolutely. So they did a greenhouse gas life cycle analysis, so that's what we know. They didn't look at the water costs, which frankly I think would be relatively low at this scale for some incremental indoor water use. It's unlikely that would be tremendous even over time. But I think that I'd be happy to share that analysis with you and dust it off, make sure it still is relevant and accurate, because I think we do want to make sure that we are getting very serious about zero waste. But we're primarily not focusing on residential in terms of a direct stream. I think it is important that whatever residential food waste is happening, that it either go down the drain or into a compost bin to make sure that it doesn't go into the landfill. But we're focusing on commercial food waste because that's just a cleaner stream. Residential can be contaminated with plastic. That plastic can't go into our digester. It really can't go anywhere besides it's trash. You know, there's discussions about whether plastic can be recycled. It's extremely difficult, and we really need to phase that out. But there's also chicken bones and other contaminants like that. And so it's harder to work with residential streams in terms of directly transferring that pickup stream in terms of the compost bin that Waste Management is picking up. It's harder for that to go directly to East Bay Mud. We would need some kind of pre-processing, and then we need an economy of scale to do that. And that takes getting a lot more cities together to figure this out. We're talking with Berkeley. We were talking with Oakland. We may have a broader conversation. We currently take Recology stream from San Francisco for multifamily, and that's working fantastic for us. So we're focusing in terms of right now with our current infrastructure capacity, the commercial and multifamily streams, and it would be great to work on that right now. I don't think we're ready to take a residential stream, but we do have staff who would be happy to talk about it with your public works staff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming here tonight, Director Katz. We really appreciate the update, and we've got your information if we have further questions.
Thank you. Thanks, and I hope you have a good meeting tonight.
Well, thank you. All right. Announcement of Commissioner Committee vacancies.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. Just to let you know that we have several vacancies for our Community Advisory Standing Committees. We have 1 business representative for the Budget Advisory Committee, 3 residents for the Commission on Aging, 1 nonprofit business representative for the Economic Development Advisory Committee, and 1 community member for Housing Committee. Applications are due on Monday, October 21st at 5 p.m. And you'll be making appointments on the November 19th, 2019 Special City Council meeting.
Thank you. All right. Council member special announcements or reports on meetings attended. Yes, Member Bowders.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 2 items. First, I wanted to thank firefighters from Local 55 for the 6th annual Back to School drive. I want to particularly thank Captain Randall West, who, since its inception, has been coordinating this event. Yesterday, they had their giveaway at Emory Unified School District, and 2 local corporate partners really stepped up to support this year. Decathlon, which is new to the Emeryville community, over at 40th and Horton Street, donated over 500 backpacks to students this year, and Stanford Children's Health donated 50 backpacks that contained school supplies for kids. The program began here in Emeryville and now is expanded across multiple cities in Alameda County. Just want to extend my gratitude to the firefighters at Local 55 and our partners. Additionally, the end of this week begins Climate Action Week nationally, and I wanted to announce 3 events that are taking place. First is the city's shoreline cleanup event, which will take place at 9 a.m. at 2333 Powell Street, which is Station 34 on the peninsula. That has been a regular event that the city has had for years, and many of you are familiar with. There are 2 other events taking place this weekend in Emeryville that are not city-sponsored events, but in my individual capacity as a council member, I'm partnering with some members of the corporate community on. On Friday, there will be a corporate challenge event, which will be a separate shoreline cleanup event at Shorebird Park at 9 a.m. Anybody who is an employee in Emeryville that wants to participate in environmental activism here in the community can participate. You can email myself or at this point there's a couple press releases out about the event. You can find the way to register for that event with your business. There are prizes for corporations that collect the most oddest and interesting trash. So come on out and participate. And then Saturday, if shoreline cleanup isn't your jam, there will be a plogging event. And plogging is a Swedish tradition that combines the art of jogging, which for some people that's an art, some people it's a pastime, and some people it's what keeps you and your doctor on good terms, with street cleanup. And so the plogging event will begin at 8:30. It's open to all residents who wish to register. There is a cap on how many can be registered. 8:30 a.m. at the IKEA garage. There will be 3 routes through the city. They are all 5K routes. They are sponsored by different corporations in Emeryville. There's an IKEA route, which is kid-friendly. We'll go through the Triangle neighborhood, and we'll have a halfway drop-off point for your trash at Councilmember Martinez's house. There is a decathlon sports route, which will go up through the Doyle Hollis neighborhood, and we'll have a drop-off location at Emory's old Ralph Hawley Middle School on 61st Street. And Cliff Bar will have its own route that will go up Shell Mound and past Cliff Bar and come down the Greenway. and the drop-off location will be the Cliff Bar facility on 66th Street. I want to thank Cliff Bar, IKEA, Decathlon, Stasher Bags, which will be providing prizes, Wareham Development, which has helped subsidize the event, Griffles, Amorous, Pixar Animation Studios, which are hosting the event on Friday, as well as Save the Bay and the Golden Gate Audubon Society, who are the nonprofit beneficiaries of all this work, for working with me over the last 6 months to pull these events off. There will be some guest speakers. The 5K ends at Decathlon Sports. There will be food, music, and a couple special world-class surfer and triathletes there to speak to the crowd. So if you're interested, again, you can email me, jbowders@emeryville.org, or look online for the registration link. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any other announcements or reports on meetings attended? Okay, thank you. City Manager's report.
None, Madam Mayor, thank you.
Ex parte communications. Yes, Member Bowders.
On item 12.3, I've spoken with several members of the privacy advocacy community and also the Emeryville Police Officers Association.
Okay. On item 11.1, I had a conversation with Brian Donahue.
I've had some email conversations on 12.3.
Okay.
And I would announce that we get to item 11.1, Madam Mayor, I'm recused because of the proximity of my residence to the project.
Right. That's it for ex parte. Any public comment for consent agenda items or items not on this agenda? Go ahead.
Madam Mayor, before you call for the vote on the consent calendar, if I could just have a minute after public comment.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio, and I used to live on Ocean Avenue, and I did quite have an attention to the laying of the East Bay mud pipe, steel pipe, and there were some things that were disturbing during the work that I did mention to the welder and to the person who is in charge of laying the pipe. And what it is that when they replace the pipe, they replace it by a larger size, which was all right, from 8 inches to 10 inches. And the pipe came in various lengths, but they were standard 40 feet long. And inside the pipe was baked enamel to facilitate the flow of water. The problem is that, the way I see it, is that when those pipes are butt to butt and they are welded, with the heat, the enamel inside chips. And when it chips, it means that the metal, which was a malleable metal for the pipe to bend in case of earthquake, is that the metal inside will rust, and there is no protection. So at that time, I was suggesting that those connections be made compressions type like they have in stainless steel. It's an aircraft technology. It's a fuel technology that the but are compression instead of being welded. But of course, there was a question of cost, and this is exactly what I was told. Well, it would be more expensive. But then all along the pipe there, holes are being drilled, and pipe for each residence are being welded. So at each connection there is a source of rust. I don't want to say with leak, because I did observe the welder did a very good job, professional. But the action of the heat on the pipe breaks the enamel inside, and then takes place the rust. I don't think the rust takes place real quickly, because there is a lack of air, loss of oxygen, but still, it does take place. And this corrosion will, in long term, affect the livability of the piping. So this is what I observe, and I'm not an expert, but I did quite a research on piping, especially on stainless steel piping. And that has been a lacune, that has been a short end of the East Bay mud. Not to go to stainless steel alloy instead of soft iron. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment for items not on this agenda? Okay. City Manager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With regard to item 10.10 on the consent calendar, which is a license agreement between the City of Emeryville and the East Oakland Community Project for 4300 San Pablo for a family shelter, and also some parking spaces behind City Hall for the family shelter staff. First of all, we have a signed agreement that was provided to the council on the dais, which was not, the agreement was included in your packet. The signed version is on your dais. And then also, I'd just like to ask the director of the East Oakland Community Project, Wendy Jackson, to just stand and introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone.
Just wanted you to meet her. She's been an absolute joy to work with, and we look forward to working with her and her team if the council approves this agreement. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming tonight, Ms. Jackson. All right, do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
I had one comment.
Okay.
So not to pull anything, but the city manager, she knew to get out ahead of me on this one probably, but I just wanted to say, last year I had the privilege of working with our city manager, the mayor of Oakland, and staff in Oakland, and we did the often inglorious work of working behind the scenes and having a lot of face-to-face time about homelessness in this East Bay area. And I had a lot of conversations with Mayor Schaaf and members of the Oakland community about how Emeryville civic service space could be made better use to people who are homeless. And voting on this makes me very happy. So thank you.
Would you like to make the motion?
I would like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion from Member Bowders, a second from Vice Mayor Pats. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Yes.
And Mayor Medina?
Aye. Fantastic. All right. Item 11.1, we've got a public hearing for the ordinance.
I need to
Oh, you
step
got a skedaddle. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville adopting an amendment to the Sherwin-Williams Planned Unit Development Preliminary Development Plan to allow the removal of street trees on the west side of Horton Street determination. Walk us through it. So you've got a whole new color scheme for your slideshows here tonight, Charlie.
This one will not be as text-heavy as the previous one. There's lots of pretty pictures, so.
Trees.
Trees and other pipes and conduit and other
Very
stuff.
excited for the conduit
Yeah, it's
pictures.
pretty exciting. So Mayor Medina, members of the City Council, we are back before you again to talk about the issue of undergrounding utilities on Horton Street adjacent to the Sherwin-Williams project and the impact on the street trees, all of which requires an amendment to the Sherwin-Williams Planned Unit Development / Preliminary Development Plan, which is what PUD-PDP stands for. Here's an overview of my presentation. First, for background, I'll talk about the chronology of the entitlements and the plans that have been approved, the community benefits the project will provide, and then the street trees and the arborists' reports that have been prepared. Then I'll have a brief section which is kind of undergrounding 101, just so that everyone is pretty much on the same page about when we talk about undergrounding utilities, what exactly we're talking about. And then the evolution of the undergrounding plans for Horton Street, including the previous proposal for a joint trench in the sidewalk, either on the east or the west side, the current proposal for the joint trench to be in the street, and the vaults in the sidewalk, either on the east or west side, and then the recommendation. I want to note that we have with us tonight Heidi Mather and Desiree Morgan from Lennar, as well as their engineer Jason Neri from CB&G, and hopefully especially Jason can answer some more technical questions that I may not be able to handle. By way of background, the PUD was approved by the City Council on November 1st, 2016. Then in December 2017, the Planning Commission approved the first final development plan, or FDP. That was for the parks and open space. In February of 2018, the Commission approved the FDP for the 4 new buildings, which will include 500 dwelling units and 2,000 to 8,000 square feet of retail space. In May of 2017, the Planning Commission approved a tentative map for the project, a subdivision map. The Phase 1 map was recorded in May of last year, and the Phase 2 map was recorded in July of this year. And the building and grading permits are currently being processed. They are expected to be issued soon, and we hope to see these buildings going up in the not-too-distant future. This is the site plan from the PUD that the City Council approved. You can see the 4 new buildings, the new park and open space area, the new road that's being built, as well as the existing building right here called 131, which is being renovated as part of the project. This is a massing drawing that was in the PUD approval, and this is a rendering of what the project will look like when it's completed. Concerning community benefits, this project required 100 development bonus points, and as you know, 50 of those points have to come from affordable housing, which equals 17% of the total units, in this case 85 units. The other 50 points have to come from community benefits, which are worth 5% of the valuation of the project, construction valuation. Of these community benefits, 3 of them are from the so-called flexible community benefit category, and that includes a pass-through that is going to be put through the existing building to connect 45th Street with the new park, an art gallery and community room, and a shuttle to the West Oakland BART station. The other community benefits are public improvements. There are 9 of them that are listed in the conditions of approval, and these include utility undergrounding, curb gutter, and sidewalk in the adjacent Park Avenue district. Number 2 on this list of 9 is utility undergrounding on Horton Street. This is the list. I realize it's a little bit tiny and hard to read, but this is the list of the community benefits for the project. These are the 3 flexible community benefits at the top, and then these are the 9 public improvements. The way this list is structured is that we've started with the estimated construction valuation, and 5% of that was about $7 million. Then we put a cost estimate on each of the public benefits. Then we added those up cumulatively over here with a running total and subtracted that from the $7 million balance until we got down to the point where we had no money left. We expect that to occur after number 6, so we don't expect to have enough money for 7, 8, and 9, although that could change because the construction valuation could change or the cost of these improvements could change. So this heavy line that separates what we're going to do from what we're not going to do could move up or down. However, number 2, as I said, is the undergrounding on Horton Street adjacent to the project site. It's a pretty sure thing that we will have sufficient funding for that. This is a map that goes along with that list. You can see the public improvements are numbered from 1 to 9, and number 2 is right here along Horton Street. I would note that these community benefits were negotiated long and hard between Lennar and city staff and the Park Avenue Residents Committee, or PARC, that represents the neighbors. Concerning street trees, we have had a total of 3 arborist reports prepared. The first was prepared in December 2014. It assessed the trees along Horton Street and Sherwin Avenue, and the arborist recommended that all the streets on Horton Street be removed and replaced with new trees in better soil conditions. Second arborist report was prepared in March of 2018. It assessed the trees on both sides of Horton Street and gave their valuations. There was no recommendation in this report. This was prepared just prior to your previous consideration of this amendment to the PUD. And then the most recent one was prepared after your consideration of the amendment and prior to tonight, of course. This was last November, and it assessed the trees on both sides of Horton Street with valuations and gave no recommendation. I'm sorry, that's incorrect. It assessed the trees on the west side of Horton Street along the project frontage and gave no recommendation. On September 6, 2016, before the council approved this PUD, you held a study session on it, and one of the questions that was asked was whether the trees on Horton Street should be retained as proposed by the applicant or removed and replaced as recommended by the arborist, and the council's decision was that the trees should be retained as proposed by the applicant, although I would note there is no explicit condition of approval that requires that. It was simply reflected in the landscape plan. And the approved landscape plan does show 11 existing trees on Horton Street to remain. This is that approved landscape plan. This symbol here, this kind of olive color, represents existing trees to remain, and those are right here. I do want to point out, however, that both from the arborist report and my own observations, there are actually 17 trees, or there were 17 trees along this section of Horton Street. So only 11 of them are shown to be retained in this approved landscape plan, which sort of implies, one could argue, that the council gave tacit approval to remove the other 6 that aren't shown in this plan when the PUD was approved, although that was not made explicit at the time. And that's particularly relevant to some trees down at this end that I will talk about later. Now for the fundamentals of undergrounding. This is a typical utility pole. You can see it's got a whole bunch of wires. Up at the top are what are called the primary lines. These are the high voltage 4,000 to 12,000 volt lines that are the sort of distribution wires. Below that are the so-called secondary lines, which are 12 to 240 volts. That's what brings the electricity to your house. And then below that are a whole lot of other wires that belong to other folks besides PG&E, such as the telephone wires and the cable TV, internet, etc. And of course, you know that there's a lot of other stuff on a telephone pole or on a utility pole besides just wires. There's transformers. Those are the most obvious things. There are also other things like switches and relays and other stuff. Now, when you do an undergrounding project, all of this stuff has to go underground, obviously. The wires go in something called a joint trench, which is a long linear excavation that carries the wires of all the different utilities. It's called a joint trench because it jointly carries all the different utilities' wires. The other stuff, this is the transformers and the other things, they're too big to fit into the joint trench, so they go in separate big boxes that are called vaults. And unlike the joint trench, each company has their own separate vaults. So you wouldn't have PG&E stuff and telephone stuff and internet stuff all in the same vault. They all have separate vaults, and you can tell because they're labeled on the top when you go down the sidewalk. For the purposes of tonight's consideration, I'm only going to talk about the big PG&E vaults because the other vaults are smaller and they're easier to accommodate. This is taken from the PG&E so-called Green Book, which I know Vice Mayor Pats is familiar with. This is sort of the Bible for all PG&E facilities. This is their diagram for a joint trench. As you can see, it has to be a minimum of 12 inches wide by 39 inches deep. And there are all kinds of distance requirements. This table indicates how far all of the different utilities have to be from each other within the joint trench. For example, the primary electrical must be at least 12 inches from a cable TV conduit and so forth. So it's, you know, not just throwing a bunch of conduits in a ditch. It's quite well figured out before that. These are a couple of pictures of some joint trenches that are under construction. They're what you would expect them to be. They're long ditches filled with conduit. These are a couple of vaults. This particular undergrounding project is going to use what are called number 6 and number 7 PG&E vaults. These are the diagrams and specifications for PG&E number 6 and number 7 vaults. This one, number 6, is the smaller one. It's 4 feet wide by 6.5 feet long by 5 feet deep. And I would note that those are the interior dimensions. So the exterior dimensions are about a foot bigger than that. The number 7 vault is bigger. It's 4.5 feet wide, 8.5 feet long, and 6 feet deep. And this is what they look like. I just took these pictures yesterday morning, walking around the Park Avenue district. These are all within a couple of blocks of City Hall. This is on Park Avenue west of Hollis Street, and I just want to note the fairly large trees that are that you can see in this picture. So just to say that large trees and utility vaults are not incompatible with each other. But in this case in particular, when we did the undergrounding on Park Avenue, we did the undergrounding first and then we planted the trees afterwards. So when these vaults were put in, we didn't have to try to snake through tree roots because the trees weren't there yet. I also want to note that these trees are not that old. They've been there for approximately 10 years and they've been this big for quite a while. So a new tree planted in good soil conditions can grow quickly to be a very large tree. A new tree doesn't imply that you're going to have a lollipop on a stick for a long period of time, necessarily, if it's the right tree planted in the right conditions. This vault is actually on Horton Street. It's a couple of blocks south of the Sherwin-Williams site. And this one, actually there's two here. I don't know if you can see. There's one in the foreground and one here in the background. These are right in front of City Hall, right out here on the sidewalk in front of this building. Another thing it's important to know about when you're talking about undergrounding is the concept of sweeps. If you have the joint trench in the street and the utility vaults in the sidewalk, it's necessary for the conduit, obviously, to get from the street to the sidewalk. And these conduits that carry the electrical cables are too big to be able to make sharp 90-degree bends. So they have to do these long, gradual bends at an angle, and that's referred to as a sweep. And you can see what that looks like in laying a joint trench here. This diagram was provided by Public Works, and it's just to illustrate that when you have a joint trench here and you have the utility box over here on the sidewalk, and you have the sweep that goes over to the vault from the joint trench, that this whole area here will impact the tree root zone. So ideally, you would not have any trees anywhere within this whole sweep area when you're doing your undergrounding project. Concerning the Horton Street undergrounding project itself, the preliminary planning indicated that there wasn't enough room for the joint trench to be put in the street. That's what we told you last year. Consequently, it was proposed to put the joint trench under the sidewalk on the west side. This would have required removal of all of the street trees, which was the original recommendation of the city arborist. On March 15th of last year, the Planning Commission unanimously recommended amending the PUD to remove all the trees on Horton Street to accommodate this. In April of last year, you all considered that recommendation and you directed that we do further research on the locations of existing utilities and the possible joint trench and vault locations with a goal of minimizing the tree removal. So we have done that. We've told Lennar and their engineers to go back and sharpen their pencils and see if they can figure this all out and find out more precisely where these utilities are actually located and if they can figure out a way to put the joint trench in the street. I just want to say at this point that you may recall last year there was some urgency to this, and you might ask reasonably, well, it's been almost a year and a half. It doesn't seem so urgent anymore. What happened to the urgency? There are two reasons for that. One is that we initially thought that the first phase final subdivision map would not be able to be recorded until this and all the other public improvements were figured out. And that was on the critical path for the project. The first phase subdivision map being recorded was on the critical path. Therefore, that put this on the critical path. We figured out that we didn't really have to have this completed before the phase one map could be recorded. We talked to Lennar and we managed to work it out as a contingency, so it didn't hold up the phase one final map. So as you can see, as I said previously, the phase one final map has now been recorded without this having been settled. And the second thing was that last year, Lennar was negotiating with a developer to purchase Building 131, which is the one that fronts right on this sidewalk, with the goal of having whoever the purchaser was do the FDP for that building and have it be the first building in the project. So it was necessary to get this figured out right away. Unfortunately, Lennar's negotiations fell through, and they still don't have a developer for the existing building. At this point, it looks as if Lennar made themselves do that FDP and then sell the building. We don't really know, but that's what I've heard. And that means that this existing building will probably be the last building to be built as part of the project rather than the first. So those are the two reasons why it seemed to be urgent last year and not so urgent anymore, although obviously it still needs to get taken care of. So this is what the Lennar engineers figured out. This is an aerial, obviously, of Horton Street, and Sherwin Avenue is over here, 45th Street is here, the north is to the right. The Sherwin-Williams site is here in yellow, and this is that existing building, 131. The Artist Co-op is across the street here and also over here, and then the Horton Street Lofts is between the two. So what they found was that there is a 6-inch water line here, a 10-inch water line there, a 12-inch recycled water line, a 4-inch gas line, an 8-inch sanitary sewer, and a 15-inch storm drain. So that's a lot of colorful spaghetti in the street, and it seems like it might be sort of impossible, but the engineers did figure out that it was possible barely to put that minimum 12-inch wide, 39-inch deep joint trench, which perhaps is bigger in this case, I don't really know, right here between the 4-inch gas main and the 12-inch recycled water main. So that's what's currently proposed, to put the joint trench in the street in this location. Like I just said. However, the vaults still need to go in the sidewalk because of two reasons. One is they're much too big to put in the street. They wouldn't be able to fit there where the joint trench is. Secondly, PG&E doesn't allow them to be put in the street anyway, in most cases. So two options were considered. One was to put the vaults on the west side, on the east side rather, that's option A, and the other, option B, to put them on the west side. Option B, with the vaults on the west side, is the most feasible of the two because it involves fewer trees with lower valuation needing to be removed. Additional trees will be planted as part of the development project, and the required new sidewalk is already part of the development project. And I will explain now why this is the case in a little more detail. However, first there's a couple of caveats. One is that there might be features under the ground that we don't know about. That they haven't found. And you know, if you've ever renovated an old house and you take the walls apart, you find stuff that you didn't know was there. That's the same when you dig up a street. Sometimes you find stuff, in fact, Public Works tells me this is the case more often than not, that you find stuff under the ground that you didn't know was there. And so there may need to be some adjustment because of that. The second thing is that PG&E has to approve the final design, and they may require changes. What I've learned is that PG&E refuses to be involved in an undergrounding project until it gets to final design. They won't be involved with you with your preliminary design. They want you to give them a final design, and then they will critique it and either approve it or make you change it. So PG&E has not seen any of these plans up till now, but they will see them later, and they may require some changes. The conditions of approval, I believe it's actually in the Park and Open Space FDP, has a condition that requires the applicant to prepare a tree protection plan, especially for the existing trees on Horton Street, to post a bond in the amount equal to the replacement value of all the trees to be protected, and be responsible for replacing any tree that dies during the construction of the project. This should take care of it if we discover, because of these two things, that a couple of additional trees need to come out. However, if these unforeseen circumstances or PG&E approval process result in drastic changes, such as the need to remove all of the existing street trees, we will bring this item back to the council for you to consider further. This is the conceptual undergrounding plan that Lennar's engineers have prepared. This is in your packet. I realize it's a large drawing that's been shrunk to a small piece of paper, and it's pretty hard to read. So I will walk you through it section by section, enlarged, but I just wanted to show you the whole thing. This is alternative A with the vaults on the east side, and this is alternative B with the vaults on the west side. But first, I want to talk about 3 trees that need to be removed regardless. And that is these trees right here, which are identified in the arborist report as number 14, 16, and 17. Number 14 is dead and actually has already been removed. So it's kind of a moot point. 16 and 17, as you can see, are right in the intersection of New 46th Street with Horton Street. 16 is actually in the street, and 17 is in the middle of the curb ramp. So those 2 trees have to come out. As I said way back in the background section, the landscape plan that was originally approved by the City Council does not actually show all the trees that are there now, and these 3 trees are actually not shown in that plan. So, because they knew when they prepared that plan they were going to have to take these trees out. So one could argue that the council has tacitly already approved the removal of these 3 trees. However, these existing trees will remain, and these new trees will be planted. So there will be quite a few new and existing trees in this area, even with the removal of these 3. This is what the dead tree looked like before it was removed, number 14. And these are the 2 trees that have to be removed because they're in that intersection. They're nice little trees. They didn't really thrive too well. They weren't planted in the best of conditions, but they do have to be removed because they're within that intersection. Now, as to the alternatives of putting the vaults on either side of the street, Alternative A looks at putting the vaults on the east side of the street. There is a number 7 vault that needs to go here. That will result in the removal of this tree, number 29. All of these existing trees will remain. And going up to the north end of the block, there's a number 6 vault that has to go there and a number 7 vault that needs to go there. That will result in the removal of these 4 trees, numbers 12, 13, 14, and 15. And these existing trees will remain. This is trees number 12, 13, and 14. This is tree number 15. You can see 12, 13, 14 there in the background. And this is tree 29, a Brazilian pepper. It's not real obvious from these pictures, but that Brazilian pepper is much bigger than the other trees. It's got a 20-inch trunk. Now going to the putting the vaults on the west side of the street. This is alternative B. That would require a number 7 vault here, and you can see the sweep that's here. That sweep is not just diagrammatic, that's more or less where it would go. This tree number 6 would need to be removed because of that. These existing trees would remain, and these new trees would be planted. Going further north on the block, there's a number 6 vault here, and there's a number 7 vault here. No trees have to be removed for these vaults. These existing trees will remain. These new trees will be planted. As I previously indicated, these 3 trees, 14, 16, and 17, have to be removed anyway, but it's not because of the utility undergrounding. They actually don't interfere with the utility undergrounding. They interfere with the street intersection in case of 16 and 17, and number 14, as I said, is dead and already removed. And this is what tree number 6 looks like. That would have to be removed if the vaults went on the west side of the street. This is a summary of the trees that would be removed in alternative A. It's 5 trees with a total valuation of a little over $20,000. As you can see, that Brazilian pepper is worth $12,000 by itself, which is more than all the other trees combined, and it's got a 20-inch trunk. And on the west side, on the west side, tree number 6 needs to be removed, an 8-inch tree with a valuation of about $2,000. So in summary, in both alternatives, the 3 trees will need to be removed that are either dead or in the middle of the new intersection, and new trees will be planted in that area along the new 46th Street. In alternative A, there will be 5 trees removed. No new trees are proposed to be planted, so that's a net loss of 5 trees. Any required sidewalk that would have to be installed along the east side of the street would have to come out of community benefit money because that's not part of the project. Alternative B would have 1 tree removed, 5 new trees planted, a net gain of 4 trees, and then the new sidewalk is already included in the development project. So it seems kind of like a no-brainer that alternative B is superior, and that is the one that we are putting forward. So this is the proposed revised landscape plan. As you can see, it has a new symbol, an X, that shows explicitly trees to be removed. Along here, these are the 3 trees that really have to be removed anyway, and again, were not shown in the original landscape plan, but in the interest of full disclosure, we're showing them on this plan as trees to be removed. We've also put a note on here that that tree is dead and has already been removed. The only reason it's still on the plan is that this plan was submitted to us either before the tree was removed or before the applicant knew it was removed. And then this tree down here is number 6, the one that needs to be removed for the undergrounding. So our recommendation is that you replace the existing landscape plan with that revised one, and that you introduce the ordinance after a motion to read by title only, open the public hearing and take public testimony regarding the ordinance, and then close the public hearing and adopt the first reading of the ordinance. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Any clarifying questions? Yes, Member Martinez.
Charlie, on page 10 of your PowerPoint presentation, I seem to recall that you said the arborist report, the most recent one from November 15th, 2018, had no recommendation on the trees. But when I look at the attachment 3C to our staff report, I'm seeing a recommendation for all 17 trees, and I hope you can clarify.
What does it say? I'm sorry.
It's either replace or remove and replace for all trees 1 through 17.
Oh, I guess I overlooked that. Apologize.
It's okay. Is the arborist here?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
That's consistent, though, with their original recommendation.
That was their original recommendation. Thank you.
I'd be surprised if they changed it.
I guess, and then my second question is, was this last arborist report informed by the design of the current undergrounding design that you're showing us for options A and B?
No.
This happened before? Guessing.
It would happen while that design was going on, but the arborist's assessment of the trees, I don't think depended on what was proposed for the undergrounding. They were just assessing the general health of those trees.
Of the trees, regardless of the work that was going on
Right.
around them?
Right. What's the shape of these trees at this point?
Okay,
That was
understood.
the point of this report.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
And I apologize that bullet point is incorrect. It was just cut and paste.
Nope, no problem. I understand that there wasn't a recommendation, I think, on the middle one, so.
Yeah, right.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome.
All right, it is 8:39. I'm going to open the public hearing at this time. Any public comment on this item?
Good evening. I just want a couple of points of clarification. The cost up there, was that for the cost of the trees only, or was the work also included in that, that costing out?
Oh, where it just said like $11,000? Charlie can respond. I believe it was just the value of the tree.
Right, it's just the valuation of the tree, what the
And-
tree is worth according to the arborist.
Okay, and the estimates for doing that work, do you have any sense?
Want me to respond to this? No. I don't have an exact figure right now. We haven't figured that out.
Okay, and then the second clarification, is there any way you can just take those trees and replant them? Remove and replant as opposed to killing them?
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Trees can be relocated, but it's expensive and difficult, and they typically don't really thrive in the new location. If they weren't planted in great conditions to begin with, and they're not healthy, I shouldn't say healthy, but not in stellar condition to begin with, and then putting them in some kind of a box and moving them to a new location, it's difficult to get them to then thrive at their new location. It can be done at great expense. Pixar removed a number of very large trees from their campus and put them on the linear park that's now the Joseph Emery Skate Park. A number of those big trees that are there came from Pixar, so it's possible. But I don't think it's probably not cost effective. It's probably more cost effective to plant a new tree.
Except for possibly the $11,000 one.
I think that one would be difficult to move.
Not on the list.
That's not on the list.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Well, it's not in alternative
A.
B. It's in alternative A. It's not in the alternative we're recommending.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Only a single public comment on street tree item. My God. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing while I can, 8:42. All right, I'm going to open it up for discussion. I'd like to kick us off. Member Donahue.
I support the staff's recommendation and choose alternative B.
Thank you. Member Martinez?
I just wanted to ask Charlie one question related to, I think it was one of the last slides on the PowerPoint. So if something were to go wrong, if we were to select option B and something were to go wrong after the final design phase, PG&E says, no, can't do this, it's all going in the sidewalk. Who pays for the tree replacement at that point if we have to do that whole row of the west side of Horton and replace all of those trees?
I would say the applicant does.
The applicant still does?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be supporting option B.
Thank you. Member Pats?
So I just want to thank everybody. This was one of those moments where it looked like there was a better solution than what was proposed, and I'm really impressed. I don't care about how long it took. I'm really impressed that you guys came up with one and really took the spirit of what we were trying to accomplish, both the undergrounding and preserving of the trees, and I really appreciated that. So I strongly support reading by title only and option B.
Thank you. I'd like to point out that, frankly, I feel a little bit embarrassed by my initial vote on this. I did not push for more information, and I got to hand it to my colleagues, especially Vice Mayor Pats, who really led on this and demanded a further study of what was underground in the street. And I understand, we might get down there and this could all get shot, and it would really suck. But I gotta say, Vice Mayor Pats really pressed us to come to this solution, to come to something that's significantly better for the community and significantly more in line with what people wanted. And I thank him for stepping up and proving me wrong on this. And so I'll also support reading by title only, if somebody wants to make a motion.
I move we read by title only.
Please call the... We've got a motion from Vice Mayor Pats, a second from Member Donahue. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders is recused. Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina?
Aye.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville adopting an amendment to the Sherwin-Williams Planned Unit Development Preliminary Development Plan, PUD PDP, to allow the removal of street trees on the west side of Horton Street with a CEQA determination of an environmental impact report for the Sherwin-Williams Project PUD, certified by the City Council on September 6, 2016.
Do we have a motion for the ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
A motion from Vice Mayor Pats, a second from Member Donahue. Please call the roll.
Councilmember is recused. Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina?
Aye. Okay. We're back up to item 12.1. I will allow Councilmember Bowders to jog back up here. Get any trash on the way. It's called plogging, apparently. All right, 12.1, resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville authorizing the release of requests for qualifications and proposals for the design and development of an affordable senior or intergenerational rental housing development, 4300 San Pablo Avenue.
All right.
A natural at putting it into presentation mode.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Valerie Bernardo. I am the Community and Economic Development Coordinator in the Department of Planning. Welcome, Mayor and City Council members. I'm here today to ask for your approval in authorizing the release of a request for qualifications and proposals for the design and development of an affordable senior or intergenerational rental housing development project located at 4300 San Pablo Avenue. 4300 San Pablo Avenue, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. The project sits on the corner of 43rd Street and San Pablo Avenue across the street from the CVS. It's very accessible to a variety of ground floor retail and commercial projects. There's a senior center located behind the property, and then there's also a lot of transit and service amenities in the area. Just so people have a point of reference, currently the site is the location of the Parks and Rec Center. Council has already authorized a temporary use for this site to be used for a temporary homeless facility. What we are proposing here today is related to a long-term use of the project site. The project has been previously brought before City Council. Originally, it was brought back in April of 2017, seeking the approval to release an RFQ for the site. At that time, we did release the RFQ. However, we did have some concerns from the developers who attended the pre-conference meeting that identified that the project wasn't currently financially feasible based on some of the FAR and density requirements. In October of 2018, City Council amended the general plan to increase the maximum development potential for that site. In December of 2018, City Council recommended that the staff reconsider the project to include intergenerational housing and not just restrict the project to senior housing only. Which brings us here today. We have brought both the RFQ proposal for intergenerational or senior housing before the Commission on Aging, as well as the Commission on Housing. Both of them unanimously approve and recommend us moving forward, or recommending Council to move forward with the release of the RFQ and RFP as we have it here today. The RFQ, which is the request for qualifications and proposals is intended to focus on the intention of an applicant who has a strong financial consideration. We are looking to utilize a two-step process. The first phase would be looking at their qualifications as well as financial feasibility of the project. We want to make sure they have experience in doing affordable residential development, but also that they have a strong management experience and understand the financial dynamics of the project. Phase 2 would be more of a consideration of physical design and advanced financial proposals. When we do the phase 1, we would then develop a short list of those applicants that were qualified and then ask them to submit a subsequent proposal identifying those physical design and financial constraints. I have here before you a proposed request for qualification schedule. If the proposal is approved today, we would move forward with distributing the request for proposals next Tuesday, which is September 24th. We would then follow that by a pre-submittal meeting to occur on October 1st. The phase 1 submittals would be due on October 18th at 5 p.m. The applicant shortlist selection would occur sometime in late December of 2019. We would then ask those shortlisted applicants to submit the phase 2 submission by March 2020. Our housing subcommittee would then do interviews for those shortlisted applicants. That would occur around April. And then the housing committee would forward their recommendations to city council sometime in May. And then we would come back to you looking for a contract award sometime in June of 2020. There will be a fiscal impact to the city on this project. This project is currently identified in the capital improvement program. We have about $1.225 million that has been allocated for this project. Those funds would be available to the developer in the form of a construction loan. We would be able to negotiate those terms. We intend to actually lease this land to the developer. In regards to how long that lease would be, that would be something that we would negotiate, and we would work with our legal team in order to help us determine what the best option is for that. And then we're also going to encourage the developer to go out and seek additional financing. There potentially could be additional resources that would be available to this project through the housing bond or through the A1 bond through the county. But we are going to ask them to go out and leverage the resources that we're providing with the land in order to make this the best financially feasible project for the city. And with that, I am asking you guys to go ahead and move forward in authorizing us to release the RFQ and RFP for qualifications and proposals for the design and development of an affordable senior or intergenerational housing project located at 4300 San Pablo Avenue. And with that, I'll answer any questions that may be.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions? No? Okay. I'm going to open it up for public comment now. Any public comment on this item?
Bill Reuter, longtime resident. I'm very pleased to see that you're leasing the land, not selling the land. That's a good principle for a development project of this kind. Thanks for including that, the staff, including that in the proposal.
Thank you.
I just want to say I'm really glad there's the intergenerational part in there. Thank you very much for that. We know from all the research and also from experience of working with children and seniors that it's the way to go to try and get intergenerational mix of families, etc. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to open it up for discussion. Member Batters.
Well, hey Valerie, great presentation. And I want to echo a couple things Mr. Reuter said. I just, honestly, this night can't get better. This is the best council meeting I've been at in a really long time. I'm like on cloud 9 right now. Everything is awesome. Everything is super. Legos, yeah. But yeah, ground leasing as a budget and fiscal policy for the city is phenomenal. I don't know why other cities don't do it. I'm glad that we have been doing it, and I hope we will continue to do that. We should actually have a written policy that says that is the policy of the city. I really think we should do that. So another future agenda item maybe. But you know, when this RFPQ first kind of came back because there were those challenges, I think the thing that's exciting about this project is, if you had talked about this 3 or 4 years ago, it was this static idea of a 39-unit senior project at 43rd and San Pablo. And we brought it back because of feasibility cost issues. And then we upzoned San Pablo to make it possible, which is a good urban core practice, especially for housing. And I'm just really grateful to everyone on council for supporting intergenerational. You know, I won't give any long speeches about it, but having worked in homelessness services for so long and worked being an unhoused youth at one point and working with unhoused youth, and then spending a lot of my time with LGBT seniors who are facing isolation and the opportunity here. There's a handful of these types of projects around the country right now, and this is a model that people are really interested in. I just want to share with council that when I went on behalf of the city to the NPH Awards to accept our Housing Champion Award, I had multiple developers come up to me and say, I'm so excited to bid on that. When is it going out? So people, and they want to do intergenerational. People want to provide co-mingled services that promote seniors, mentoring youth who are either aged out of foster care or were homeless, and young people who can teach them how to, you know, get off their jitterbug and text their actual grandkids for once. Didn't mean to do that to you, Councilor Martinez. So I just think that the opportunities here are really exciting. I'm really interested to see what this RFPQ will yield. And I think the location across from the school and within a couple blocks of the senior center, this is an ideal location, and we have done all the right things on this. So I'm just really grateful to be part of this process.
Any other comments? Member Donahue.
Yeah, I just want to thank Councilmember Bowders for pushing us to do this, and also just thank the Emeryville voters for giving us a budget to do affordable housing. You know, it's just like we are moving forward, and it's just so encouraging.
That's right.
Martinez.
I just think it's amazing that we have such a small parcel on a transit corridor that's carrying so much weight in the next few years, and just going to be doing so much for the community. And I also want to thank Councilmember Bowders for pushing us in this direction. So I look forward to supporting this.
So I just want to echo, I walk past this site every day. I take my dog out for a walk, and this is on her route. And so I look at this site and I just think about all the potential there for this exact thing. I've already talked with the city manager and the Alameda County Housing Authority about utilizing the multi-generational facet. So there are lots of options, and I'm really excited by this project. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I echo all the comments of my fellow council members. I think this is a phenomenal idea. When Governor Newsom was here a few months ago, he said Emeryville is a city that gets it. And tonight, we get it and we do it. We're really doing the thing. So yeah, with that, you want to make the motion?
I would like to make a motion to approve the RFPQ for 4300 San Pablo Avenue.
I'll second. We've got a motion from Member Bowders, a second for myself. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Awesome. Next up, 12.2, discussion on whether to form an ad hoc committee of the City Council to discuss and make recommendations regarding the city's recognition policy, which apparently means how we name stuff. Do we have a staff report on this or anything? You guys?
This was Madam Mayor, this was a request from Councilmember Pats to bring this forward for the council's discussion. It requires a formal action of the council to create an ad hoc subcommittee, so that's why this is before you.
So, you know, this is a perfect item to follow. And there's more than just one thing floating out there, but the site we're talking about is the Robert Savage Community Center, and there are a lot of things in this town thanks to the hard work that he did. And while it's possible that the new seniors housing will continue to bear his name, I think it's just, he's one of many examples of people. And so I'm excited by the prospect of taking a look at this, bringing some options back to council. I've spoken with Member Bowders about this. He shares my enthusiasm. And so I just think we're asking for your permission to meet and discuss these things.
Thank you. I'm going to open up for public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none.
Move approval.
May I make one statement?
Yeah.
I just think that Vice Mayor Pats is absolutely the right person to lead on this, and your work on community services committee and your connection to the school and other family and community-oriented groups that we have in the community will be benefited by you being the person who's championing this. So I look forward to that, and I'm happy to work with you.
Thank you for that. And I will say, if any members of the community here tonight or are watching have people that they want to recognize, feel free to reach out to myself or any member, or actually to Mr. Bowders or myself, so we can bring it forward.
So, Madam Mayor, to clarify then, Councilmember Martinez's motion is to create an ad hoc subcommittee consisting of Vice Mayor Pats and Councilmember Bowders to discuss the city's recognition policy?
You got it.
That was the motion.
That's the motion.
Wow,
Yeah.
she was so much more succinct than you were.
I understood.
I want to point out that our existing policy has some interesting things about, how things get named and can be named. Dedication to a person is one thing, but, geographic clarity. I'd also like to remind our community that we have a name that came up that just seemed to be embraced out of nowhere, Rotten City Arts District. We're embracing a historic time in creating ourselves, and, that your ad hoc committee should consider a wide range of things in our city that could be named, not just buildings, and we have lots of streets, and we have all kinds of things you could consider. So that's all.
Just so you know my thinking on this, I'm thinking some things with Christian, some things with Pats, some things Christian Pats. I've got lots of variants out there.
CPAT.
CR Pats.
All right, I'll second the
Dr.
motion,
Pat.
but
That's why there's two people on
we
the
can
committee.
still veto anything that comes back here. I will second the motion, though. Please call the roll.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Call the roll.
He's dying at CPAT's Hall.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
We know the order. Just say aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor.
Mayor Pats and Vice Mayor Pats.
Yes.
Aye. Jesus Christ.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Okay.
Wow.
We're done with that.
It's 9 o'clock. We know what the bewitching hour is at Emeryville City Hall.
Council discussion on whether to provide staff to bring forward a council action on the use of facial recognition technology, different kind of recognition. Member Bowders?
Oh, yeah, that's me.
Same thing
sorry,
I did.
Sorry. Yeah, so the agenda item here, I think there's members of the public who will speak on this, but high-level concept, the use of facial recognition technology as a function of government oversight, monitoring, or enforcement has become a growing concern in a number of communities. And I want to be really careful how I say this to make sure that I distinguish the use of technology from the legitimate activities of the police department in helping us apprehend people who are committing crime. But the growth of this technology has posed several risks to the privacy rights of individuals whose information is erroneously attached to biometric types of information and data, and it's shared in large quantities and databases, and it's disseminated in a way that it's different from a credit card, as I've learned. It's not like you can get a different credit card if someone uses your credit card, but if somebody impersonates or your information is linked to an image of yourself, you can't really get a new image. Now, some of us can, but it costs a lot of money. Thank you for that laugh. I needed a laugh. And so I don't want to say too much more other than several other communities near us, Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley recently had a discussion about this. I think it merits having a conversation about that. Now, I want to kind of provide the scope of it as being the city's use of it, and how do we distinguish between the city affirmatively using this information? There's secondary effects of what happens when we receive information from other places where they don't have such a prohibition, and also how do we ensure that we protect the conduct of city employees so they're not unduly or unfairly penalized for accessing or being in contact with information that doesn't originate in our city that may be the source of facial recognition technology. So there's a gambit of issues there to discuss. It's not as clear cut to as it might sound at first, but I think it's a really important issue to discuss. And so I wanted to have that discussion. And Madam Mayor, if you will entertain public comment, I think the council will become more educated on this item, and we can discuss what to do.
All right. Are there any clarifying questions? Nope. All right, I'll open up public comment.
Hi there. My name's Jason Kelly. I'm here on behalf of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We are a nonprofit law firm that's... Thank you. We are a nonprofit law firm that is located in San Francisco. We've been protecting civil liberties for nearly 30 years now. And we're here basically to respectfully ask for your support of this discussion, and then also eventually on a prohibition on city use of face recognition technology. If you'd like to separate it out from the previous action item, 12.2, we call it face surveillance instead of face recognition, since that's really what we think of it as. So quick statement, just giving you a little more information about what we see as a problem with this. All face surveillance systems threaten the privacy and safety of Emeryville residents because face surveillance has the ability to track people in private moments, such as when they attend medical appointments. It can chill the ability for people to freely associate and to express their right to free speech and religion, for example, when they're attending worship services or political rallies. And even if this is unintended, it's simply the way the technology works. Once implemented, like you mentioned, Councilmember, it's very difficult to opt out of face recognition. Again, you can't change your face once a data breach occurs. Additionally, it's been well documented and is significantly problematic that face recognition technology has disproportionately higher error rates for women and people of color. Because additionally, it uses photo databases for comparison, such as mugshot databases, which often contain a disproportionate representation of already marginalized communities. The use of this kind of technology also exacerbates and intensifies historical biases in our justice system. These issues remain in our research, whether face surveillance systems are operating in real time or using recorded footage, so that you can make a distinction between types of face surveillance. But for our money, both cause these problems. And for these reasons, we are excited that you're having this conversation, and we would urge you all to support a prohibition on the city use of face recognition technology. Thank you.
I just want to confirm I heard Legos and plugging tonight.
Welcome to Emeryville, sir.
Welcome. My name is Brian Hofer. I'm the Executive Director of Secure Justice. I also have the privilege of chairing the City of Oakland's Privacy Commission. I'm part of a 25 organization coalition that worked on the San Francisco and Oakland bans. We cleared Berkeley's Public Safety Committee yesterday by unanimous vote. We're spread kind of thin tonight because this movement's really taking off. Oakland actually just had its second required reading about half an hour ago. We were interrupted by the summer recess, so some of our members are down there, and we were also part of the AB 1215 coalition, which is the statewide moratorium on the use of this technology with body cameras. We expect Governor Newsom to be signing that any day now. I hope you got a chance to review the letter that we sent in earlier, and the only points I really want to publicly highlight in that is that the United Nations has called for a moratorium on this. The San Francisco Chronicle endorsed both the Oakland and Berkeley, both the Oakland and San Francisco bans. Berkeley was not in play at that time. And then to talk maybe a little bit more about the sort of concerns that Councilmember Botters raised, and thank you for listening to our coalition on this. What our intent is with this is not to get to gotcha. Right? We want compliance. We don't want you to acquire or use this dangerous technology for a number of reasons, but we're not looking to put police officers or other staffers at risk of liability. And so the language that we've used in both Oakland and Berkeley, San Francisco, draws that distinction between the intentional and unintentional use. Let's say the FBI has a federal investigation open, they identify a wanted suspect living in Emeryville, they call up your police department to go serve a search warrant. That's a common interaction between federal and local law enforcement. Your police would be able to act on that. They would not be liable for violating this proposal as we envision it, the language we have in these other cities. Let's say on the private side, Amazon Ring doorbell is getting popular. Somebody's house gets robbed. A private citizen identifies someone on their own, calls up the police and says, hey, John Smith robbed my house. We think there is a public interest in the police being able to act on that tip. And so that's the line we're trying to draw. We don't want to make police so afraid that they can't do their job, but we do believe that this one technology, and I think the reason it's really taking off these bans is it's the creepiness factor. It works at a distance. It works without our knowledge. The expensive part of the surveillance infrastructure is already everywhere. Cameras are everywhere. You just have to flip the switch and apply the analytics, and that's the scary part of this technology, different than others. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Tim Kingston, and I'm a criminal defense investigator. I work at the San Francisco Department of, not public health, public defender. I got concerned about this a couple of years ago, and I will repeat the problems about it in terms of misidentification of women and people of color in particular, because of the modeling that's used is for people like me, white. The main problem I see with this facial recognition technology is rather like license plate readers. License plate readers show where a car is at particular points. It can be tracked. You can buy databases where I could say where your car has been for the past 6 months. I can tell a lot about your life with that. Facial recognition technology does the exact same thing with you and where you've been and who you've seen. That alone makes it deeply problematic. It's also, I believe it's unconstitutional because it will make people afraid to go to demonstrations or protests. It also is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, because telephones, you can have a search warrant on it. Your face, you're stuck with it. There's no way there's a search warrant on your face. It's there. And finally, it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment because your right to self-incriminate disappears because it's right there. I just want to read one thing from The Guardian I found. It's from a human rights lawyer in the United Kingdom saying, I don't think it should ever be used. It is one of the, if not the greatest threats to individual freedom, partly because of the intimacy of the information it takes and hands to the state without your consent and without even your knowledge, and partly because you don't know what's done with that information. I really don't think that information should be given out. Please examine this issue carefully.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Salah Al-Bakri. I was in elected office in the city of Oakland between the year 2001 and 2007. And when this technology came up, it just brought up memories of 2002 when I was sitting in a movie theater with my attorney friend, and the blockbuster came out, Minority Report, with Tom Cruise as a lead actor, if you remember it. And I remember him trying to avoid having his face being recognized through his reading of his retina. And I remember talking to my attorney friend at the time, and I told him that I thought that California has, privacy in California is a state right. And he said, no, well, it is, but not if you don't defend it. And time has come by, and I thought at that time that this is not a technology that's too far away. This is not too much of a science fiction, that one day we will all be living this reality. And it really scared me because while few of my friends here mentioned that it's very problematic for women and people of color, about 22 state representatives, assembly members of the state of California were misidentified as criminal. I could vision in the future that a minor moving violation could become a life-threatening emergency if we all know that law enforcement agency are on the alert, and if they get an information that this guy or this lady has committed a crime or prime criminal, so you can see how things could escalate out of hand. It's just a small deal. For me, it's more problematic. It's more than just your color and what you are. Because to me, nothing's more detrimental to democracy than decreasing level of privacy or lack of. Would I have run for office if I known that people might have stored images of me doing something wrong 30 years prior? Would I run? I'm an activist. I have strong passion for what's happening to our environment and our criminal justice system, and I'm constantly in protests and rally. Would I participate in them? I think it is really necessary for the survival of any democracy that we are free to express ourselves, and we're constantly, consistently, and continuously self-correcting. The scary part about this technology is that hasn't been regulated. As my friend Brian mentioned, that infrastructure is already there. We just have to turn on the software at any given time, and there is no coming back from that. We all need to keep a certain level of privacy.
That's your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional public comment on this item? Okay. I'm going to open it up for discussion then. Member Batters, let you start since you brought this forward.
I would be interested to hear from my colleagues. I presented the item. You've heard from 4 members of the public who have, in their 3 minutes each, better encapsulated the reasons why I wanted the council to have the opportunity to decide if we wanted to delve into this and discuss it. I think it's an important issue of civil rights, personal property, and at a time when the federal government is very dramatically eating away at the civil liberties and rights of people, especially people who are trying to emigrate to this country or who have previously immigrated to this country who don't look like I do and don't believe maybe have the same beliefs or languages I have. I just think it's important and consistent with our prior policies to examine this carefully.
Thank you. Member Donahue.
This is partly, directed at our chief, but I've noticed that without this technology, it seems like your department is able to use just captured images without the technology to identify repeat offenders. It's almost like you don't need it for so many crimes that have been solved by your use of video and video technology and just still shots of people. Is that true?
Yes, we currently operate without facial recognition technology, and we solve crimes using pictures and videos. And I do agree with the speakers that this technology has flaws in that it has false recognition of women and people of color. So we don't use it. It's not on my radar to acquire it. And but I do agree with the concern that staff may inadvertently use a referral from another agency or organization that was captured using that technology.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Pats?
I think this is really an important issue, and I'm really excited that Member Bowders put it on the agenda. I share a lot of the same concerns of the speakers and look forward to seeing the policy that we draft.
Thank you. Member Martinez?
Well, we certainly won't be the first ones to dip our toes into these policy matters, and I think there's a lot we can learn from San Francisco and Oakland and Berkeley as well.
I agree. I think this is a really complex issue. I want to recommend that we discuss a use policy in addition to possibly a ban on it, not just going straight for the ban, but considering if we should use it, and if so, what those use policies are around data. Government agencies don't have the best data policies. That's over and over been proven to be true. And in fact, several times data storage by government agencies has had many women killed through domestic violence. Apparently DMVs can sell information in most states. I think it's really important for us to have this conversation. I want to be careful about it because, I work in the technology industry. Sometimes there's visceral reactions to things, but I think in this case, it is a significant civil liberties issue. It's pretty complex though, so I don't know if we want to bring it directly back to council or public safety committee for a deep dive and some recommendations. That would be my one question here.
I'm open to what people think about the last question. I would just add that I think there are ways to the comments you made, Madam Mayor, to ensure that the city, I think it's one thing to say that the city will not acquire facial recognition technology or use it, and no person on staff in the city will be authorized to utilize that technology directly, so that we have a very clear line as to what our city policy is. And I think, to your point, they're not here this evening, but I want to recognize a couple of the comments I've heard from the POA about this sometime, and I think there's going to be discussion about this, as we go forward. But if a judge gives warrant to access a phone, and the only way to access the phone is to use the facial recognition of the person who owns the phone, so there are probably, to your point, use examples where the technology does not lie with the city, but and I've heard that sometimes there are batches of data that get shared where a piece of the data is derived from that. And so those are and I think the fear and the concern is just how to make sure that we do not punish police officers, especially in a climate where there's so much scrutiny over how they do their job. And I agree, we want compliance. We don't want a punishment oriented policy. That's not the goal with this in my request. So I think if the direction that we could give this evening, and I'm open to whether we bring that back for a study session here first, might be appropriate, as opposed to something like we did with parking. And it could, if there are individual issues that need to be, dived into deeper, we can discuss how to do that. But I would propose that the direction we give staff is to work to develop at a conceptual level something that will ban the city's direct use of that, and come up with a nuanced policy that protects city employees from the receipt of or the indirect use of those technologies, but works to minimize its effectiveness and use here in the city, so that we're not contributing to the problems that are created for people who are disproportionately impacted by its use as a technology.
Okay. One thing I'd like to add is that we should carefully consider the definition of the technology. I think often in emerging texts, they're defined overly broadly. It could encapsulate technologies that we are currently using but don't necessarily consider facial recognition technology. And I haven't looked at the other ordinances to see how they have defined it, but I would like us to pay particular attention to that definition. That can be extremely important when writing a tech policy.
I agree.
So what do we think? Do we want to put it through a committee for a very deep investigation before bringing it to council, or a study session? I'm open to either, really.
I like a study session, partly because I think it's bigger than public safety.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm happy to have this agendized in the future as a study session. But I acknowledge that this is a lot of information that staff will probably have to get outside resources on.
So, Madam Mayor, right, since we don't actually know, it would be helpful to have a sense of what the policy objective is. I think the Councilmember Bowders articulated, I missed the end of it. It would be relatively straightforward for us to draft a ban on the city acquiring the technology. Yeah. But these other much larger cities with many more resources may have more extensive ordinances. So it would be helpful to get a sense of how extensive we're trying to go here, and where I'm going to look in our organization to get those resources to do that analysis. Because I think there is consensus that this city doesn't want to acquire that technology. But I also know, and I think the POA has shared this with Councilmember Bowders, there is a concern about if the policy impacts, for example, if it creates a disciplinary potential, there's a possibility that there could be meet and confer obligations with regard to MOUs, those kind of things. So we want to be mindful as we craft this about what policy objective we're trying to achieve and then what other processes we trigger as we do so.
So I'll propose, and tell me if I'm helping you or not. I would propose to refine it to, on one, there's two pieces to it as I see it. One is the one you've already captured, which is citywide ban on the acquisition and direct use of it. And I think the second piece is, I'll open with coming from a place of obtaining minimized use or reliance on facial recognition technology, how to best minimize the use of it in the course of conducting official city business with a mindset of obtaining compliance as their priority and not a mode or system of punishing. And if council is supportive, because I don't want to take too much time, but I want to get the city manager what she wants. I have samples of each of the ordinances that exist, and I can provide those to, because I believe that they better color what it is that we could be doing. And that's just to, not to propose anything to this council directly, but just to give staff additional resources to look at. And this could be something we carry onto a future agenda. So if they come back with questions after they have that and they want future or further direction from us, it's not limited to what I give them. They can ask for further direction if we need to.
So which cities are you thinking of?
San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley.
I believe there was a congressional hearing on this as well recently. Perhaps we should see if there's a congressional record on this that might offer further information.
Sure, no opposition to that.
So,
was that helpful or not?
The first part was clear, the second part a little less so, but I think we can work on that as we delve into all of these other ordinances. I will just be very candid and confess that our bandwidth is a little bit tapped out in the current moment, given the two department head departures, and we don't have a lot of, or any management analysts really. So we'll do the best we can to bring something back for you to react to. If it may hopefully be before the end of the calendar year, but it may be early in the new year.
perhaps we could encapsulate the second part as use policy for data obtained from third parties that use facial recognition technology.
That's fair.
Got it.
And would council be supportive of me providing the information I had? Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah,
Yes.
of course.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I think that closes that out. Item 13, department head reports. We're down to one.
So I'll speak on behalf of Public Works. The Greenway project is starting on Monday, which we're very excited about. Notices have been going out about that. And we are also looking at starting the signal projects at 40th and Harlan, and there's a second one that I'm now forgetting. Those will be starting, I believe, the second week of October. So those are also something we've been waiting for a while. And I signed the bridge contract today.
Nice.
This day can't get much better. This day is like Christmas.
I could have more carbs. Charlie,
Yes, ma'am.
you got a report for us?
Oh, no.
No? Whoa. Okay, future agenda item requests from council members.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been in a hole looking up incentives for multifamily EV chargers, and there seems to be a gap in these incentives. I know there's one offered by BACMID, but we're out of cycle for them. And they're
which for chargers for where?
For multifamily EV chargers. And I was talking to a resident, and apparently, at least in the last cycle, one of the requirements was that folks already owned
the electric vehicles before they could, their application would be accepted. So basically, I was wondering if we could make a referral to the Sustainability Committee to look at, that gap in incentives for multifamily EV charging, and seeing if there's anything that other cities are doing to help folks, because it's EBCE is applying for a grant with the California Energy Commission, but that won't come online until 2021 if we get the funding. So
If I may, City Manager, would that be encapsulated under the REACH codes session we're going to have?
I was just wondering, it won't, the incentives won't be. The REACH code discussion would be requirements.
Okay.
But the incentives is a different sort of take on it.
yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if we could have some sort of discussion about, are other cities doing anything? Are there funds that we could be taking advantage of that the city can acquire that can be translated into an incentive for multifamily EV charging?
And this would be for existing buildings?
Yeah.
Okay, so the REACH codes would be for new construction or renovation probably. So
Okay.
We can, again, Sustainability Committee, I can talk to
look
the
at
staff about it and see if there's something we can come up with.
Happy to take it at Sustainability. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And then I just had one more, actually, it's just a question for the city manager. Do we have something on the calendar to get a report out on legislative session? Or if not?
Usually it's later in the fall.
Yeah.
You don't yet.
We'll give the governor the opportunity to
sign lots of things.
Yes, sign things.
But we can certainly talk to our lobbyist and get that scheduled. Yeah.
And I'm happy to get it as an information item on consent if he's not available. But I'm happy to leave it to staff's discretion if there are weighty topics that we need to hear back.
There's a couple things that we'll be wanting to, we want to give you an update on what happened this last session, but we also want to tee up some things for next year. So I think we'd like to have him here to have that conversation.
Great, thank you. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, of course. Okay, I forgot to report on meetings attended that I went to a Gilman Fields JPA that had no. Laugh now. I came out of that meeting smiling, and we need to agendize a discussion of what happened to that JPA, a proposed new JPA based on proportional usage.
Which means we pay less.
Yep.
I support.
Yes.
3 years I've been in that committee, okay?
If you accomplish this,
say, yeah.
if she accomplishes this, we have to really rethink a lot of things about
We have to schedule a soccer game on the ECCL field.
Yeah.
I say we take on Berkeley first. Emeryville versus Berkeley. Kick their ass. Hey, we've passed that. What did your Brian
the
call
young
it?
side of the dais is recommending a soccer game. This side of the dais is like egg toss.
Whatever.
So, Madam Mayor, I'll talk to staff and community services, and we'll get that scheduled.
Great. They should be emailing the information as they promised to, but
Yeah, I was gonna say they're not gonna do anything fast for that.
I had a good time in that meeting. Anybody else?
Like I said, it is Christmas. Add something to the agenda. Let's get it done. Today's a good day.
Okay. If there's nothing else, then I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 9:31.
Thank you much.